in January 1943, announced the order of the People's Commissar of Defense on the introduction of epaulettes. Deputy Regimental Commander Kazakov, at a meeting of the commanding officers, briefly told the story of the introduction of shoulder straps in the Russian army. Epaulettes became one of the symbols of military valor of the Russian army, he said. A warrior who dishonored his honor, as a rule, was deprived of epaulettes. We, fighters of the Red Army, are the legitimate heirs of the glory of Russian soldiers. Therefore, we take from the arsenal of combat traditions of our fathers and grandfathers all the best that contributes to the rise of military spirit, strengthening discipline, high consciousness, honor duty. The introduction of epaulettes once again confirms the continuity of glorious traditions and will further strengthen the unity of command, increase the responsibility of commanding officers. After silence, the deputy commander finished his speech with an unusual address for us. Us, comrade officers. Hearing the deafening rumble of voices, he raised his hand. Yes, comrade officers of our valiant Red Army, with honor and pride wear epaulettes, testifying to belonging to the most progressive, freedom-loving People's Army. Winter brought new worries. It turned out that many soldiers do not know how to ski. We had to create special groups and to train the most trained skiers. On one Sunday, the regiment commander organized a ski competition for 20 kilometers. Unexpectedly for myself, I took the first place. The hardening received in my youth had an impact. The secondary school, where I studied, was 7 kilometers from home, and every day in any weather I ran on skis there and back. In the school, I consolidated these skills. Soon after the regimental skiing competitions, there were brigade competitions, where I took the second place. You do not cheer you, Eltunin, for the honor of the regiment, reproachfully told me the regimental commander. Why didn't you get the first place? I didn't have enough strength, I explained. I was so weak in the middle of the distance that my stomach started to cramp. Okay, waved his hand Lieutenant Colonel. I'll order to give you in the canteen for the time of preparation for the district competitions to give you an increased portion, wagging his finger. He added, but look at me if you don't come first. Sky training was added to my daily worries. They drove me to exhaustion. By midnight, I could hardly get to the bunks and instantly fell asleep. Intensified nutrition helped me to get stronger quickly. Comrades supported me. One morning, the commander of the 2nd Platoon, Lieutenant Vakurov, laid out a piece of lard in front of me. Where did you get such wealth? I was surprised. I'm a bridegroom, Sir Lieutenant winked slyly. My fiancée, Dasha, sent it to you. When I came to her yesterday, sticking out my tongue fatigue, she took pity on me. You poor thing, she said. You've run 15 versts. How can you run back? I answered, run such a distance once a week, and not for speed, but my commander runs it every day. So she gave me a piece of lard, telling me to give it to you. Sekurov's love story began shortly after our placement in the camp. At the solemn meeting dedicated to the 25th anniversary of the Great October Socialist Revolution, representatives of the party and Komsomol organizations of the nearest collective farm arrived. The secretary of the Komsomol organization, Dasha Ryumkina, was attracted to the brown-eyed Vakurov. At first, Dasha occasionally visited her favorite for an hour, and when the snow fell, Vakurov's Sunday evening began to run away on skis in the village, and in the morning returned to the beginning of classes. And how do you stand it? I asked him once. Love has wings. Smiling, Vakurov replied. On the day of departure for the district competitions, I was approached by an unfamiliar skinny swarthy fighter with coal-black Gypsy Vasya Zhemchuzhin. He introduced himself, dashing, and opened his straight white teeth in a smile. Permission to address you, Comrade Lieutenant? Go ahead, Gypsy Vasya. What company are you from? From the marching battalion, Comrade Lieutenant. They told me you're going to Orenburg? Yes, I'm on my way. What's the matter? Mies, give me the letter. Vasya handed me a triangle. I look at it carefully, but I can't find an addressee to give it to. Who should I give the letter to? To the first Gypsy or Gypsy woman I meet. Tell them it's from Vasy Zemkushin. They'll find someone to give it to. All right, I agreed, hesitatingly twirling the triangle in my hands. I'll give it to you if I see it. You'll see it, said Vasya. Our people are always hanging around the station. And after a moment's silence, he added, I'm going to the front soon. I have to say goodbye. Stepping out on the platform of the Orenburg station, I suddenly found myself surrounded by hustling gypsies. Half undressed with blue faces, they tried to smile, the eldest of them slapping his palms dashingly on his thighs. Comrade Commander, give me a tenner. Let's dance on our bellies and on our heads. I felt sorry for the frozen kids, taking money out of my pocket and handing it to the older gypsy. I said, "No need to dance, guys. Go to the station building and warm yourselves." Thank you, Comrade Commander." The boy dashingly raised his fist with the bills clenched in it to his shabby soldier's cap. I wondered, I grinned involuntarily, remembering his suggestion. "How do you manage to dance on your belly and on your head?" "Very simply, Comrade Commander." The boy smiled slyly and, jumping up, with an exclamation of "A!" Shavels several times struck his palms on his stomach and on his head. So much for dancing. I laughed. I took a few steps toward the exit to the city, and suddenly remembered the letter that the gypsy Vasia had handed me. "Guys, where are your parents?" "Mkite." The older one didn't understand. "My parents, father or mother." "Why do you need them?" The guy stared at me suspiciously with black eyes. "Vasia Zemchuzhin served in our unit. He asked me to give him a letter." "Give me the letter." The older boy came closer and resolutely held out his hand. "Don't be afraid, we'll pass it on." He handed over the letter and hurried to the place where the participants of the competition gathered. The whole next day was given to familiarization with the route. When I found out that masters of sports participate in the competition, I got discouraged. Where could I expect to win a prize? But, having reflected, I calmed down. If there is no hope for victory, there is nothing to worry about. The day of the competition came. The frost gripped my nose and pinched my cheeks. Even I, accustomed to the Siberian cold, am not standing still. I'm happy to get off the start. I have never participated in a 20-kilometer race. However, the experience gained in my native village told me that I should not take off from the start. You'll quickly run out of breath. Catch your breath. I overcame the first 5 kilometers. No advice, no remarks. I realize that I showed a bad time. The image of the angry regiment commander appears before my eyes. Watch me if you don't come first. First, I would like to be in the top 10. Maybe then they wouldn't rip me for the extra food. Will the Siberians on skis be in the tail? I cheer myself up mentally and gradually speed up the run, overtaking 3 participants who left earlier. At the 10-kilometer checkpoint, I'm greeted with interested looks. One of the controllers waves his hand in a friendly manner. At about the 12th kilometer, I leave behind 2 more skiers. The excitement of the race takes over. As soon as I see someone running ahead, I pick up the pace and accelerate until my rival is behind me. At the 15-kilometer checkpoint, I am met and greeted with shouts. "You're going well. Push the whole railroad. How it spurs you on." And fatigue immediately feels less and breathing becomes smoother. I am approaching the finish line amidst the universal roar of approval, which causes joyful bewilderment in my soul. Am I really a winner? Some 50 meters left, and suddenly my left ski slips off. I stumble and stretch on the track. I jump up and, not paying attention, run the remaining stretch on one ski. By the many hands extended to shake, I guess that the result is not bad. In any case, I will be in the top 10. When the judging panel summarized the results, I was pleasantly stunned. Third, I'm not ashamed to return to the regiment. My modest victory in the competition, however, did not attract much attention. The regiment was jubilant about the grandiose successes of the Red Army, successfully advancing on a huge front. Quite recently, the fascist troops were turning Stalingrad into ruins, were tearing towards the passes of the main Caucasus Ridge, and now they were fighting back somewhere near Kharkov. To be there as part of the advancing troops became the innermost desire of most commanders. That's why the send-off of the next marching companies was held solemnly. The station is full of seeing off, departing with proud smiles, listening to good wishes. Near one of the cars gathered a huge crowd. You can hear the tearing sounds of guitars, cheerful shouts. Curious people are flocking here from all sides. I squeeze forward with difficulty, and am surprised to see gypsies dancing dashingly. They are circling around a swarthy fighter, in whom I immediately recognized Vasia the gypsy. Standing in the center of the dancers, he clapped his palms on all parts of his wiry body to the beat of the music. Although he was without his overcoat, his cheeks were flaming. I guessed what he had written to his relatives and friends about. Having received the letter, the gypsies raided the station. When the horn player signaled to the cars, Vasia approached the bearded gypsy. He put his hands on his shoulders, said something. then hugged him tightly and pushed him firmly away from himself. The fighter immediately found himself in the arms of his tribesmen. The women shouted loudly, the men clapped poor Vazir on his bony back, and the boys and girls looked at him with wide-open eyes and tried to grasp him with chilled hands for his wide gelifs. Finally, Pearl broke free from the embrace of his loved ones. Climbing into the Teplushka, he turned to the seeing off and, waving his hat, shouted, "No farewell, novels. I will prove to the fascists that we too have a homeland." The train slowly moved and, gaining speed, disappeared around the corner. Lieutenant Colonel Contran did not have time to fully realize his intention to renew the command staff at the expense of frontline soldiers. As soon as he had seconded his deputy in formation, Captain Noskov, he suddenly disappeared. There was a rumor that he was hastily recalled. The new regiment commander, a young slender Major Korolev, became a frequent visitor to the units, walked in silence, scrutinized everything. Soon he signed an order, which noted the shortcomings and set specific tasks to improve training and methodological work. Our commander was pointed out the need to pay more attention to improving the methodological skills of unit command. Lieutenant Sushilin, who took the criticism painfully, reported to the regiment commander that he considered himself insufficiently prepared to conduct training and methodological work with commanders, and asked to second him to the active army. Korolev did not support his request, but promised to find him an experienced deputy, and suddenly, quite unexpectedly, I was appointed to this position and even awarded the next military rank of senior lieutenant, so that the chief of artillery of the regiment, Nikita Flegontovich Yakushin, became a captain. On this occasion, his comrades gathered in his dugout. I was among those invited. Gumarin, announcing that the rank will be washed in the old officer's custom, put 2 stars in a tin mug, poured some vodka in it, and handed it to the celebrant. "Almost 30 years ago," he said, "I washed my rank of lieutenant in the same way in the circle of friends. Later I bitterly regretted that I wore officers' epaulettes, and now I am happy that our comrade is attaching a star to his officers' epaulettes. History repeats itself. Come on, Nikita Flegontovich." Yakushin slowly sips his vodka and pours the washed stars onto a plate. Gumarin takes them and pins them to the epaulettes of the newly minted captain, then raises them up. I propose a toast to the health and further successes of Captain Nikita Flegontovich Yakushin. When everyone drank, the culprit of the celebration suddenly attacked the toastmaster. "No, buddy, history does not repeat itself. I don't agree. 30 years ago you were celebrating the rank of lieutenant in the Tsarist army, and now we are celebrating the rank of captain of the Red Army. Do you understand the fundamental difference? No, you don't. It's not about the title, it's the content. Who could become an officer in the Tsarist army? Only the children of the rich, mostly landlords." Wait, interrupted Gumorin. "And Shaposhnikov?" "Well, Shaposhnikov from a family of officials. In addition, the First World War forced the Tsarist officers to squeeze to give educated people from the bourgeois and some of the bravest soldiers from workers and peasants to put on the uniform of the ensign, and led to the death of their own comrades. So it's not about the title, it's about the content. I'm proud to be a captain in the Red Army, so I propose a toast to our glorious Red Army, to our Red officers, the children of the working people, for our victory over the enemy, for the Soviet soldiers to reach Berlin," adds Gumorin. Nikita Flegontovich complained to me, tugging at his harness. "Here and gave a captain, but not allowed to the front, they say. Old man, what kind of an old man am I? Do I look like an old man?" He jumped up from his stool, waved his hand as if he had a saber clutched in it. And the next day we saw off a new squad to the front. There was a concert for those leaving. A stage was built on an open area, benches were dug in. Unexpectedly, I was among the artists, and it happened like this. One of the organizers of the concert was a junior political officer, Yakovlev, deputy commander of my former machine gun company. Having met me a few days before the concert, he said that he could not find a reciter-declamator, and, having torn out of a notebook a sheet with a rewritten poem, asked me to help. I liked the poem. All the days before the concert, walking to and from class, I repeated the favorite line. I don't want everything that was sacred and preserved for us by our ancestors to be suddenly blown up and crumpled and burned on fascist bonfires. The concert began in the afternoon. At first, the choir of one of the battalions performed Alexandrov's song Arise, Vast Country. Then the accordionist performed a medley on the themes of folk songs. Then the girls sang ditties. They sang fervently, self-consciously. I listened so much that I forgot about the upcoming performance and shuddered when I heard my name. I had forgotten the title of the poem I was to announce myself. I painfully remember staring intently at the rows of people sitting down, as if I were waiting for a clue. The pause turned out to be a godsend. The audience froze. Everyone's attention focused on my dazed figure. In that dead silence, my voice came through clearly. I don't want to. A poem by an unknown poet. I read as I remember, loudly, not very expressively, but the last lines: I will not shame a warrior's honor in battle. I will be fearless. I'll be merciless. I'll stop the enemy and defeat him. With such heat, with such fury, he raised his hands above his head that the soldiers suddenly jumped up from their seats and, shaking their fists, shouted, "Let's crush the enemy. Let's destroy the fascists." The spectators did not immediately calm down, and Yakovlev gave me a friendly clap on the shoulder. Well done, like a real artist read it. This was my first and last success on stage. Only after the war I accidentally learned that the author of the poem was the poet Sergei Mikhalkov, and again began the daily routine. However, neither exhausting all the forces of the classes, nor drills and marching throws, and various household concerns could not displace the anxiety about the fate of my father and Marina, the letter from home every time I worry. What if my little sister reports the death of my father? After all, she wrote that funerals come to the village more and more often, and when for some reason the letters are delayed, anxiety drives me to sleeplessness. Why is my father on the front line and not me, young and healthy? True, from my father's letters I can understand that he is fighting somewhere southeast of Oral. Judging by the reports of Sovinform it's still relatively quiet there. But the front is the front, hooray, and shoot and bombing Where's Marina? I didn't expect that the feeling of gratitude to the girl who nursed me in the hospital would be so overwhelming. The unknown is disturbing. It pinches my heart. Tears and my first inquiry to the main sanitary department of the Red Army about the fate of Nurse Dmitrieva received a discouraging answer, listed as missing in action. So the hospital had no time to evacuate. After the offensive of fascist troops on the southern front in June 1942 began so rapidly that such slow-moving institutions such as hospitals were in an extremely difficult situation. There was no response at all to my other inquiries. When our troops liberated Lykuya in the winter of 1943, I sent letters to the military commandant of the station and the military commander of the Zverevsky district. The commandant said that the hospital had managed to leave, and he knew nothing about its further fate, and was interested in the address of Marina's parents. If I had known him, it never occurred to me that he would ever be needed. Realizing that the search came to a dead end, firmly decide if I live to peaceful days, then in the first vacation I will go to the station like Haya, go around all the surrounding villages and be sure to find her friend. The anxious July days of 1943 came. Classes in the companies began with information about the events at the Kursk Bulge. Sovinform Bureau reports on the liquidation of fascist troops on both the northern and southern facades of the Kursk Bulge were marked by regimental rallies. The echo of the 1st Artillery Salute, sounded on August 5 in honor of the liberation of Oral and Belgorod, found a joyful echo in our hearts. Under the thunder of victory salutes in the fall of 1943, my service in the reserve regiment ended. However, at first I got to a separate reserve officer regiment of the South Ural military district, and already from there in the beginning of November I was sent to the Byelorussian front. As it is sung in a popular song, the pickings were not long, and here already glimpsed station after station, and anxious and joyful. There were battles ahead, and somewhere in these same places, on the Belarusian front, my father is fighting. I could not imagine that soon our front lines will cross at one of the river crossings, that the most incredible thing will happen. On the roads of war I will meet Marina. Third year on the native land rolls the shaft of war, crumbling cities, burning villages, destroyed creations of the human mind. Year of blood and sweet. At the front, incredible tension. In the rear, millions of people are torn away from their usual activities. They die in battles, freeze in the trenches, get wet on the march. For the third year, echelons with replenishment, military equipment, weapons, ammunition, equipment, wounded are going along the roads, and people live by the harsh laws of wartime. They are undernourished, undersleep for the sake of one thing, everything for the front, everything for victory. And so day after day, week after week, month after month. In one of the military echelons in the fall of the 43rd, I was leaving for the front. The wheels clattered on the joints of the rails, shriveled fields, forests coloured with autumn colours, villages and hamlets, station settlements, towns floated by. The wind rushed in through the open doors of the Tepleshki. The air had not yet had time to cool down completely. It was fresh, clean and pleasantly invigorating. In some places along the railroad track there was a motley sarafan of leaves. The beauty of autumn landscapes brought back memories, took us to our native places. Soldiers and commanders talked about military events, recollected peaceful life, talked about the most precious, intimate things that remained beyond the line of June 22, 1941, once and for all crossed millions of human destinies. The people gathered were experienced. Most of them had time, as they say, to taste the delights of front life, to be in such troubles, from which not always and not all return. The war for them became a difficult, dangerous, but necessary work without which it was impossible to dream of victory. Therefore, if they started talking about military affairs, they spoke simply and clearly, judiciously and intelligently. Without unnecessary embellishments, they recalled battles and battles, gave an assessment of the enemy. No, not that German went, not that one. Rolls up a cigarette, leads the conversation with surrounded comrades Petty Officer Luzgin. On the Petty Officer's uniform, the burgundy enamel shines the Order of the Red Star. Medals shine, patches for heavy wounds are visible. I remember in the 41st and 42nd Krauts were coming through. Sometimes, if you take him prisoner, he'll be courtling, pulling his hand up. Heil Hitler! But when his cheekbone was broken at Stalingrad and his neck was broken at Kursk, he started another song. Hitler seeing the soldiers surrounding the petty officer are laughing, making barbs, salty witticisms to Hitler and the top of the Reich. Somebody in a long bass, deep in thought, remarks, "They are adapting to the times, blaming everything on Hitler. But where were they themselves, and even now?" "That's right," picks up the petty officer. "And I wanted to say only about this now. The Krauts are still fighting desperately, holding on to the end. What's my point? Yes, to the fact that some may be thinking that now we'll pelt the Krauts with hats. No, you're kidding. Recently, near Beresta, I was kissed in the shoulder by a Nazi mine fragment. Our artillery was hammering the German front line for an hour and a half. It seemed that there was nothing alive there, but only we went up to the attack, as fascist firing points came to life. We two there, we here, and he was machine gunning, and that's all there was to it. We had to bow to Mother Earth and more. We pulled up the artillery. Things became easier, but again the fascists snapped back. We had to smoke the bastard out of every hole." Jerking the wheel of a trophy lighter, Luzgin lit up and thoughtfully said, "Many guys we missed then. And what guys? Knowledgeable, with frontline experience. It's bitter to remember it." Luzin sighed heavily, and after a short pause added, "I think, and further the German will persist. After the battle in the headquarters dugout, our scouts found an order, in which, in addition to the calls to die in the name of the Führer and Germany, was a threat. Abandonment of the position is punishable by death. Here they are, the pies." The buffers rattled, creaked, the train slowed down, and then stopped altogether. From the head car there was a loud voice of the duty officer on the echelon. "Don't get out of the cars, don't go out." But I had already jumped out. The train was moving. I had to move to a neighbouring Teplushka. There I met with a short, well-fitting Senior Lieutenant Tamiri Zeev, whom I had already managed to get acquainted with during the journey. He sat down on a neatly trimmed log offered by the fighter and listened. The political officer continued the conversation. It was about the Puchkov family, which, with the approach of the dandy, together with other villagers, the fascists drove out of the house. In travelling vicissitudes, the daughter dies. Hitlerites separate the mother from her son. The tragedy of the fascist invasion, such stories are thousands, tens of thousands. How much grief the enemy brought to our land. Soldiers and commanders listened to the Partorga, sighing. Near me, a sergeant stares intently at the reflection of the sun. In his big grey eyes there is longing and pain. "My men are hiding somewhere," he whispers. "Third year under the German. I haven't heard a word. How are they there? Are they alive?" I couldn't stand it. I put my hand on his shoulder. "Be strong, soldier, be strong. You're not the only one. Soon we'll clear our land of fascist scum. You'll find your family, you'll find them, and everything will be all right. The train is moving. At first slowly, then faster and faster the cars roll. The semaphore blinks its green eye at us in farewell. People are silent, experiencing what they have heard. I see Timiriazev folding the newspaper, not in a hurry to comment. And what should he say? Everything is clear. I have a warm, good feeling for this old man. He managed to convey the content of the article's slave caravan to his comrades in such a way that there are no indifferent people. I can't think of a better propaganda. The wind whistles in the doorway of the carriage, beats elastically in the face, carries away the Makorokny smoke. The yellow glare of the sun's rays dances on the concentrated faces, gymnasers, overcoats, cotton coats, word by word. The conversation comes to life again. The thread of conversation is mostly woven from the latest frontline events. Settling conversations move from the general to the personal and return to the general topic. Sometimes it is difficult to distinguish one from the other. The war has so closely intertwined the fates of individual people with the fate of the country. I have just begun to live. A soldier with pockmarks on his wide-skulled face shares his thoughts with his comrades. The board of the collective farm awarded me a log cabin for my hard work. I rebuilt. I started a farm. And then you see, the war, and everything went to ruin. Not a yard or a stake left. The Germans burned it all down. It's the same story with me, Vasiliev sighs a neighbor. The Nazis burned everything down. My wife writes she lives in a dugout with her children, and my youngest is only 4 years old. And after a short pause, we'll survive. Against all odds we'll endure, and we'll live as well as before. Myasma and Smolensk were left behind. The train entered the area of the Belarusian forests. On the sides of the railway track stretched pine trees, firs, aspens, bluish sources of water in the lowlands, saturated with autumn rains, rivulets. On the right and left for a good couple of hundred sashens, and even more, the forest was cut down, and at the crossings, arrows, bridges on the heights, trenches with shelters, embrasures for machine guns and machine guns, dug. The fascists have built them. Nods in the direction of engineering structures of an elderly soldier. I had to fight in the partisans here. The Germans were afraid of our brother. They were so afraid, so they used up the forest. Parasites. On the slopes of the embankment, hulks of burned wagons, cars blackened by fire, broken armoured personnel carriers, tanks, guns and other military equipment, traces of recent battles. Oven chimneys on the places of villages and farms became more frequent. Belarus is a partisan land. I heard about the deeds of the People's Avengers. For more than 2 years in the deep rear of the enemy, Belarusian partisans crushed fascist garrisons, put out of action railroads, bridges, derailed trains, conducted reconnaissance work. As it later became known, by the end of 1943 in all regions of enemy-occupied Belarus, there were underground regional committees of the party, more than 185 city committees, inter-district committees, district committees, and other underground bodies, uniting hundreds of primary party organizations. The names of partisan commanders V.V. Lobank, Vierzy Korsh, R.N. Magulski, Grandfather Minet, and many others flew around the country. The earth was burning under the feet of the invaders. The enemy was atrocious. His punitive detachments prowled through the partisan zones, hanged and shot villagers, put on fire farms, villages. It was not easy to look at what the fascists had done. Where a year or two ago there was life, the autumn wind was ruling, bringing sadness and longing. Fireplaces, collapsed craters on the place of cellars and crosses, fresh and already darkened by time and rain. I don't remember what we talked about at that time, but it wasn't important. What we saw increased hatred, burning, merciless, towards the enemy, who had brought our people these incalculable sufferings. We unloaded at a blind station. A fine rain was falling. The trees approaching to the buildings looked gloomy, and the thicket of pines, spruces, birches, aspen trees, which went into the hollow, merged into a dark mass. Shreds of dirty fog crawled along the ground. It smelled of dampness. The soldiers and commanders were talking leisurely, and from time to time they looked at the distant lightning. There was the front line. An hour and a half later, representatives of the headquarters of the 11th Army, Lieutenant General I. Fedyuninsky, arrived at the camp. The distribution of personnel to the units began. I, together with a group of officers, was sent to the command of the commander of the 53rd Rifle Corps, Major General I.A. Gartsev. In the personnel department of the corps, I was assigned to the 197th Infantry Division. The next day I arrived to the place by hitchhiking. I introduced myself to the head of the personnel department, Captain Taranov. He asked me about the passage of service. Division Commander Colonel Danilovsky in the headquarters is not. Together with other arriving officers, you will be received by the head of the political department. He was tall, with sunken cheeks, a deep wrinkle between thick eyebrows, with large grey eyes. Lieutenant Colonel Pyotr Grigorievich Zhivago. Now he introduced himself. Welcome, fellow officers, to our Bryansk Red Banner Division. Schott shook hands with each of us and invited us to sit down. He briefly acquainted us with the history of the division, spoke warmly about the veterans of the unit. Lad, we will get acquainted in more detail during the battles. The division will come into contact with the enemy any day now. He asked if there were any personal questions, wished us every success, and let us go. Leaving the dugout, we took with us the warmth of spirit caused by this seemingly harsh man and pride for the division in which we were to serve. Zhivago did not call us to be equal to the frontline soldiers, no, but the tone with which he congratulated us on our arrival in the Bryansk Red Banner, the story, or rather even information about the combat path of one of the youngest divisions, were more significant than high words and appeals. We left with a good mood, the desire to find ourselves in the combat team. In these days, the troops of the Corps and the army fought on the right bank of the Soch River. The enemy sought to delay our offensive. On numerous rivers, in interlake passages, and even in swamps, the fascists created a system of intermediate frontiers, and villages and farms turned into strongholds. On the most probable directions of our offensive, the enemy concentrated tanks and artillery, covered the approaches to their defences with minefields and engineering structures. To understand the reasons of Hitlerites' persistence, it was enough to look at the map. Through Byelorusia, it was possible to reach Poland and East Prussia by the shortest ways. I do not dare to judge about other strategic consequences for the German fascist command in connection with the loss of Belarusia. They are well documented in historical documents, memoirs of marshals of the Soviet Union G. K. Zhukov, A. M. Vasilevsky, and other military leaders. The division was in the second echelon of the corps. In the headquarters was preparing for the upcoming introduction of it into battle. For lack of a vacant position of battalion commander, I was temporarily assigned to the operational department. The work is unfamiliar, but there was nothing to be done. I began to familiarized myself with people, the history of the compound. The division was born on May 8, 1943, on the basis of the directive of the Supreme Command Headquarters. It was formed in the Venyevsky district of the Tula region from parts of the 120th Chapiv and 147th Cadet Brigade. On July 22, as part of the 53rd Rifle Corps of the Bryansk Front, it took its baptism of fire on the right bank of the Reseta River. The test of courage began, a severe exam for everyone, from the rank and file to the division command, and they passed this exam. In a few days they liberated 15 settlements from the Nazi invaders, and hundreds of soldiers showed courage and bravery. I had more than once heard about the combat deeds of the battery of Senior Lieutenant Leonid Baikov, and more than 30 years later, working on archival documents, I read with excitement about the collective feat of mortars. In one of the July battles, Senior Sergeants Viktor Zervin, Peter Dryatchev, Nikolai Demidov, Prokopy Klimov, Nikolai Kolomitsev, Sergeant Afanasy Filimonov, Red Army soldiers Alexander Roshkov, Ivan Matveyev, Andrei Lavrov repelled a counterattack of superior enemy forces and destroyed up to a company of infantry and an enemy tank. In another battle, when the fascists surrounded the observation post, Senior Lieutenant Baikov called the artillery fire on himself. For this brave officer was awarded the Order of the Red Banner. The feat of the Red Army man of the 8th Rifle Company of the 3rd Battalion of the 862nd Rifle Regiment, Nikolai Talalushkin, remained in the memory of his fellow soldiers forever. At a small place, Klin, the company stormed the enemy stronghold. The advance of the unit was hindered by a Nazi bunker. Sanders lay down under dagger machine gun fire. Several men were wounded. A neighbor groaned. Pulling himself up on his hands, Talalushkin rushed into a small hollow next to it. Bullets sang above his head. One line. The second, the third. Sanger came on. His hand slipped to his bag. Got it. Talalushkin pulled out a grenade. Blood rushed to his face. He felt hot. He did not yet know what he would do, but he could not stand idly by any longer. His comrades, with whom he was still drinking and eating from the same pot, talking about life and who shared with him what they could, were dying nearby. Now they, his battle friends, were lying on the damp ground after a short July downpour, and there was no chance to raise their heads under the enemy's machine gun fire. Talalushkin rushed toward a low racketnik. He overcame the shrubbery, crossed a small hollow with a jerk, and fell into a thick burdock. He crawled, every meter closer and closer to the bunker. I can already hear how the shotgun shell casings thrown away from the machine gun are clattering. It's time. With a short swing, as he was taught, he threw a grenade into the embrasure. Take that, dog. The machine gun went silent. But when Talalushkin was about to get up, the line struck again. You bastard. Spat the saliva of the soldier. Once again he was furious at the fascists, who prevented him from completing the attack, and angry at himself for not being able to destroy the bazooka, although he was not guilty of it. The embrasure was narrow, the grenade bounced off, exploded on the slope of the bunker. The explosion deafened the Nazis, and the shattered shrapnel made them fall to the bottom of the dugout. But the Germans almost immediately came to their senses and took up arms again. Animal fear for their own lives gave Hitlerites strength. Completely different motives guided Talalushkin. A passionate desire to save his comrades, to give the company, battalion and the regiment as a whole, the opportunity to move forward, to liberate another piece of native land. He jumped to his feet, jerked over the distance, separating him from the bellowing lead bunker. Few people saw this swift throw. It was not up to his comrades who were looking for a way out of the situation, but when the machine gun shot was cut off and there was silence, many saw the soldier's body stretched out over the enemy embrasure. They didn't think of the deed then. No. Just one of them had to silence the machine gun. With a shout of hurrah, the soldiers rushed forward and seized the stronghold. Realization of what Nikolai Talalushkin had done came to them later, when the commander built the battalion, thanked everyone for the task, said a warm word about the dead, pulled back the edge of the cloak tent. The soldier's face was revealed to everyone. It was calm, only a little tired, as if after a hard road fighter lay down to rest, and now will get up and go with everyone else further. Calm and satisfied, excluding even the slightest shadow of fear. Such is the face of a man who has fulfilled his duty to the end. Look, comrades, to whom we owe today's success. Private Talalushkin sacrificed himself to fulfill the task. In the name of the motherland, soldiers and commanders, standing with uncovered heads, looked at the prostrate body of a comrade in arms. And what to say, not one of them rolled out a stinging male tear. They could not restrain themselves, though they understood that the laws of war are harsh, and it is impossible to do without sacrifices. Soon the fallen in this battle were buried. A farewell salute rang out. Many of them were posthumously awarded for their courage and heroism, and the Komsomol Red Army soldier Nikolai Stepanovich Talalushkin was awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union by the decree of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR. Meanwhile, the battles on the Orel bridgehead, in which the troops of the Central, Western and Bryansk fronts took part, were coming to their logical conclusion. After Orel, the towns of Dmitrovsk-Orlovsky, Karashev and others were liberated. The Soviet troops approached the defensive line Hagen, created by the enemy east of Bryansk. The enemy stubbornly resisted. It is understandable. As a result of the offensive of our troops, he was deprived of a major hub of railroads and highways, giving him the opportunity to maneuver forces and means along the front and in depth. Bryansk. It should be noted that our superiority in the art of offensive operations won. The troops of the 50th and 3rd Armies struck in the rear of the enemy grouping, in the direction of Bezhitsa, and the compounds of the 11th Army approached the Desna River near the city itself. The German fascist command did not immediately determine the direction of the main blow. The enemy was deprived of the opportunity to conduct aerial reconnaissance because the sky was completely dominated by Soviet aviation. Under its reliable cover from September 11 to September 13, the division fought fierce battles with the enemy on the close approaches to Bryansk. The enemy's defense had to be literally gnawed through. Solid minefields, bunkers, pillboxes, and other engineering structures covered the approaches to roads, farms, villages, and hamlets. The soil saturated with water, lowlands, floodplain meadows, swamps, and marshes, which had crumbled from the past rains, hindered maneuver. Nevertheless, the regiments moved forward. During these days, the division units liberated Volodyarsky, Tolstoy, Vorovsky folk-in settlements. Ahead was Bryansk. Cut by the Desna River and its tributary Bulva, the city was burning. It was hard to understand what could still be burning there. The wooden buildings had been burned down completely during the battles of the 41st and during the enemy occupation. The SS torchbearers had done their best. Only a few brick buildings remained of the ancient town. Divisional scouts reported that there are no buildings nearby. The same reported, and the commander of the 889th Rifle Regiment, Major Philip Fyodorovich, the bridge over the Desna was blown up. Colonel Danilovsky gathered at the headquarters of the commanders of units, spoke about forcing the Desna and the capture of the city of Bryansk. Looking at the map hanging on the wall of the tent with a map of the enemy's defences, the officers frowned. They were primarily concerned about the river. There were no crossing facilities available, and their appearance in the coming hours was not expected. The Corps and the Army are on the offensive on a wide front, everywhere water crossings. They knew about it, but still everyone hoped for some. What if the divisional command, connected with the headquarters of the Corps and the Army, could plant something? Meanwhile, Fyodor Semyonovich Danilovsky said, "All hope for your cleverness. Use rafts, look for fishing boats. The local population should have them. Finally, think about making wattles and fences. The only thing I can help you with is to mark a false forcing area before you go to the water's edge. We have looked for a site for this purpose with the Chief of Staff." He nodded towards Lieutenant Colonel Abashev. "Allocated funds. Perhaps the enemy will take the bait and pull their artillery. More, you take advantage of it." Fyodor Semyonovich coughed, and with a hoarseness in his voice continued. "Chain forcing must be friendly. Delay, disparate actions are fraught with unnecessary blood." Having stopped on the general issues of the task, Colonel Danilovsky announced the decision to force the river. He paid special attention to the organization of interaction. The meeting ended late in the evening, and at night the regiments began to move. On the right flank rattled battle. There was a false forcing. Machine guns were pouring in, automatic rifles were shot, guns were sounding in a measured and monotonous manner, German 6-barrel mortars were rattling. On the directions of the main forcing it was still quiet. Hitlerites, occasionally opening fire from machine guns and automatic rifles, fired at random. Regimental scouts and sappers, sent to prepare crossing places, did not respond, and this apparently confused the enemy. The enemy did not know that it was here that the main actions would unfold. According to the testimony of prisoners taken during this battle, he began to move to the site of false forcing infantry units, artillery, and more. On the left flank, the forward battalions of the division secretly concentrated in the folds of the terrain, simultaneously reached the water's edge and began to cross on improvised means. The soldiers held onto logs, barrels, pushed rafts, board fences, on which were installed machine guns, anti-tank guns, mortars, boxes of ammunition. In a number of places it was possible to reach the opposite shore silently. The soldiers jumped out on dry land and engaged in hand-to-hand combat with the enemy. Soon the shore of the Desna River echoed with fire. From the opposite side hit our guns and mortars. The enemy resisted fiercely, counterattacked, trying to throw into the water groups of daredevils. But more and more platoons and companies of the regiments of the division came to their aid. Soon the artillery came up. Battalion platoons of Magpies regimental batteries crossed the bridge restored by sappers. Over the crossings circled the German reconnaissance aircraft and began to hang lanterns. But their dead light could not pierce the smoke and gunpowder cinders over the river. The enchanted Desna, as the locals affectionately called the river from time immemorial, was booming, swelling with fountains of explosion. The German fascist command did not count on such a wide front of our offensive and was not able to dispose of forces and means in the best way. Under the pressure of our units, the enemy began to withdraw. Great success fell to the share of the battalion of Captain Grigory Golovko. Almost without losses, he crossed the Desna, captured 3 trenches and, sowing panic among the Germans, began to smash the artillery at firing positions and the enemy rear. The 889th Rifle Regiment of Major Philip Zeit had a more difficult time. On the direction of his offensive, the enemy was very resistant, but our fighters fought desperately. Commanders skillfully managed the available firepower. With each hour, the regiment more and more expanded the bridgehead. In the rumble of cannonade, in the fire of fires, the units broke into the streets of the city and, without stopping, rushed to the center of Bryansk. Regimental commanders reported to the division headquarters about the capture of buildings, streets, neighborhoods. The fascists continued to persist, sometimes even counterattacked our battalions, but these were only attempts to somehow hold back the division's advance. We did not feel a firm guiding hand. On September 17, the division, together with parts of the 323rd Rifle Division of Colonel Sergei Fedorovich Ukrainets, captured Bryansk. On the same day, the soldiers and commanders heard the glad tidings. By order of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, the division was given the honorary name of Bryansk. In this regard, a rally was held in the central square of the city. Bryansk addressed the soldiers Colonel Fyodor Semenovich Danilovsky. Look at the city whose name is today assigned to our rifle division. It is all in ruins. Fascist barbarians spared neither residential neighborhoods, nor schools and hospitals, nor even kindergartens and nurseries. I cannot find words to express my anger and indignation at Hitler's outrages. I urge you, my fighting comrades, to mercilessly take revenge on the insidious enemy, to drive him from our sacred land. Death to the fascist invader. Death, 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 death. Echoed by infantrymen, artillerymen, mortarmen, sappers. Representatives of local party and Soviet bodies warmly thanked the liberators. For the first time for many months in the city streets again heard the Soviet music. Songs were ringing. Fractional tapping of the Russian dance was scattered. The inhabitants of Bryansk celebrated the liberation. Having failed to hold Bryansk, the German Ninth Army began to withdraw quickly to the west, covering its retreat with strong rearguards. Its units sought to break away from our troops and take the defense along the Soch River, where, according to the plans of the German command, was to be finally stopped the Red Army offensive. This boundary wanted to use the commander of the Ninth Army, Colonel General model, to save his troops from complete defeat. The Bryansk front was tasked to reach the Soch on October 23. In accordance with it, received the tasks of the Army and Corps. The division started fighting on the outskirts of the small town of Poshep. The terrain here was full of streams and swamps, lowlands. The roads, as a rule, were mined. Not only sappers, but also engineer-trained rifle units had to be thrown in to neutralize the mines. Poshep stands on the river Sudost. Here, 2 railroads and 5 highways converged. The fascists prepared the town for defense in advance. Several trenches of full profile were connected with each other by passages of communication, cut-off positions. In the trenches were cut into the pillboxes, bunkers, put direct flood guns. In front of the leading edge of the enemy put in several rows of wire fence. The most vulnerable places in the defense covered the spiral Bruno. All this was to be overcome by the Soviet troops. The headquarters of the Corps and the army demanded decisive action. It was very difficult to take the city head-on. The division command decided to concentrate efforts on the flanks. Regiments began to bypass the city. Above and below the city, advanced units began to force Sudosti. The enemy hastily began to remove units from the sections of the defense front and move them to the places of forcing. This was used by Colonel Danilovsky. So regiment of the 2nd Echelon was struck in the center of the enemy defense, which allowed not only to throw the enemy off the right bank of the river, but also to cling to the outermost houses of Poshep on the left. Street battles ensued. The fighting continued until the morning of September 21. The last groups of the enemy surrendered before dawn. In Poshep and adjacent to it, farms was captured a lot of military equipment, weapons. Some armored personnel carriers and vehicles were in good condition. They were filled with fuel, oil, adapted for the collection and transportation of trophy property. It was impossible to give the enemy a break. This was well understood by higher headquarters. They hurried commanders with the organization of the pursuit. In the division arrived the commander of the corps, in which the division was operating at that time, Major General Pereva. Having familiarized himself with the situation and waiting for the sappers to finish building a bridge on a small but deep river, a tributary of Sudosti, he had a conversation with the division commander. "Now an Icha Toyov," said Pyotr Vasilievich to Colonel Danilovsky, "a tough nut. According to intelligence, the garrison there is solid. In addition, and for maneuver the enemy has good conditions. 3 railroads, not to mention highways. Nevertheless, the city must be taken faster and get to the Soch." So the sappers' work progressed rapidly. The soldiers dragged the fir trees on themselves, cut them to the required size, adjusted them and put them under the lags. From time to time the corps commander looked at them, frowned, and finally could not stand. "Take care of the forest. This wealth has been growing for many years." "Comrade General." And the commander of the sapper battalion, who was out of breath, ran up. "We take only barrels damaged by aviation and artillery. We dismantle German dugouts." "So, you live not only for today, Captain?" Not from me, from the people who have to live here after our deeds with you, thank you. Pereva threw a glance in the direction of the bridge. Soon? In about 5 minutes we can cross. The corps commander stood up, gave his hand to Colonel Danilovsky with the words, I expect from you, Fyodor Semyonovich, decisive action. Don't let the enemy break away. Press him all the time. I see. We'll press to break into Aneka on his shoulders. Major General Pereva wished the division commander success and left. About 40 minutes later, we started to pursue the enemy. Soon the sky began to frown. The weather was clearly deteriorating. Units and subdivisions walked at an accelerated pace. On the sides of the railroad stretched forest clearings, burnt farms and villages. Hitlerites exterminated the forest along the roads, devoted to fire dwellings, shot women, children, old people. Heavy pictures of devastation of the native land rose before the eyes of soldiers and commanders, giving rise to pain and anger in people. Closer to Anisha, clashes with the enemy began. Combat guards of regiments more and more often engaged in firefights with retreating groups of Hitlerites. Sappers removed mines, made passages in barriers. Separate enemy barriers had to be knocked down with the support of artillery and tanks. But no matter how much the units hurried to Aneka, they had to stop in front of the town. Divisional scouts confirmed the information received earlier about advanced preparation of the Nazis for defense. Engineering structures of the gate covered the fire of artillery, mortars, and small arms. Without proper preparation to attack, it was difficult. On the night of September, 22 regiments, individual battalions and companies of the division concentrated 3 kilometers from Aneka. Forest massif reliably hid people and military equipment. The trees, soaked under the autumn rain, were making a deafening noise, showering people with large cold drops. The fog was stretching from the lowlands. No fires were made. The soldiers hid in the sleeves of their overcoats, or under their cloak tents the flames of self-cigarettes. Only carefully camouflaged camp kitchens were lit. At first glance, everything around seemed extinct, but it was far from that. In the units, there was an intense life. Commanders summarized the results, headquarters prepared documents, political workers held meetings, conversations, instructed the party and Komsomol scouts were leaving and returning through deep forest paths, ravines. Transporters were delivering ammunition. On archival documents, I paid attention to the lines. By a bypass maneuver, the division captured a major railway junction and the city of Aneka. They interested me. To pass in a day more than 20 kilometers, and even with fighting, a matter of no nonsense, and here and maneuver. Isn't that a bit much? However, a meeting with the former commander of the division, retired Major General Fyodor Semyonovich Danilovsky, dispelled doubts. Aneka captured on the night of September 23rd, said Fyodor Semyonovich. Even before approaching the woods in front of the city, formed from units of the 862nd Rifle Regiment, Major Kozyevnikov mechanized group with the task of bypassing the city from the southeast. 828th Rifle Regiment allocated part of the forces to bypass the enemy from the north. Before the adoption of this option, opinions were divided. Chief of Staff Lieutenant Colonel Fedor Abashev insisted on the maneuver. Operators led by Major Pyotr Vasilievich Rumyantsev held a different opinion, and they were right to some extent. Detours are not scouted. People are tired. The planned cry might be... There is a known risk, Abashev said hotly, but one does not take risks at the front. Besides, the Krauts have been afraid of our detours since Stalingrad like hell. They won't really understand what forces bypassed the city. I think that the game is worth the candle. As for the people, the supported Fedor Fedorovich, head of the political department, Lieutenant Colonel Peter Grigorievich Shevego. You'd understand. We will allocate communists to the group, send political officers, talk to people, explain the situation. It is tempting to take possession of the city with little blood. The scales tipped in the direction of maneuver. We were counting on surprise, but it wasn't easy. We couldn't go on the air, but the enemy could figure out our plan. We decided to act on time. Nevertheless, we prepared radio stations. With the beginning of hostilities, we were allowed to broadcast hope. I must say, the communicate of Major Alexey Ovtynnikov worked perfectly. Somewhere closer to 22 hours regiments, bypassing the flanks of the enemy, without artillery preparation, went to storm Aneka. Rifle chains in the rear of the enemy appeared so suddenly that the Nazis in the first minutes did not offer much resistance. When the Germans began to come out of shock, the rifle companies opened heavy fire on them. Exchange of fire on the flanks and in the rear caused alarm among the Nazis in the first trenches. This was taken advantage of by units of the 889th Rifle Regiment of Major Philip Fedorovich. Having overturned the enemy, they broke into the city outskirts. Advancement was so rapid that from separate houses Germans jumped out half undressed. Most of the Nazis immediately surrendered, and those who tried to run fell under rifle and machine gun fire. An Oberlieutenant was brought to me. Without a headdress, his hair was dishevelled in a shirt, shivering. I look at the escort. A tall, slender sergeant answer. He jumped out of the house, Comrade Colonel, and started pulling. We took him here, the Goose. We brought him to you like that. My word of honour. I believe you. Thank you, Comrade Sergeant. See prisoner, beating out the trembling with his teeth, like a parrot gibbered one word in Russian. Kotel, Kotel. He ensiled, and the division intelligence chief couldn't even stand it. They are afraid of Russian cauldrons, Comrade Colonel. They sleep and see themselves in them. And this one is bickering. And to the German, Circular U is no longer a boiler. The lid, do you understand me? Me? Then at all frightened the Oberleutnant. Of course, not all the time the regiments advanced successfully, as in the beginning. Some houses and streets had to be blocked, taken by storm. Especially the enemy resisted on the territory of the railroad station. However, even here he was forced to yield to our onslaught. And how not to yield when even now, many years after the war, it is difficult to single out any one of the participants of this night assault. All fought bravely. Recently I received a letter from one of them, a former machine gunner of the 828th Rifle Regiment, Private Chernyshev, now a resident of the State Farm Krasny Oktyabr, Pavlovsky District, Voronezh region. Alexei Semyonovich writes that in the battle at the capture of Arnatia he was wounded, but did not leave. Like many of his comrades, the company chain continued to fire at the enemy. To this it remains to add that the feat was massive. At midnight, the town of Arnatia was completely liberated. From cellars, orchards, and vegetable gardens, the inhabitants poured into the streets. Everyone, from children to the elderly, poured out. Arnatia residents embraced soldiers and commanders, not hiding tears of joy. For more than 2 years, fascist propaganda tirelessly see. The Red Army is destroyed. But time passed. The war continued. Contrary to Goebbels's concoction, other news came. Moscow was alive. The fascists were defeated at Stalingrad, Kursk F. They were brought by underground fighters, partisans, and sometimes the fascists themselves blabbed. And then the front came here. The long-awaited liberation came. Station tracks of Arnatia, several echelons with enemy equipment, ammunition, food were captured. Trophy teams took everything on the account. With the permission of the commander, the rear men, at the request of representatives of the party and Soviet bodies, began to distribute foodstuffs to the townspeople. In the morning of September 23, a citywide rally was held. Representatives of the public spoke about the atrocities of the occupants. Most of the townspeople suffered heavy losses during the Hitler invasion. This one had his relative shot by the fascists, that one had friends executed. Members of hundreds of families were separated. People languished in the German foreign land, rotted in the Gestapo prisons, fascist concentration camps, worked for the Nazis and their henchmen because of a piece of bread. Decisive actions of the unit at the capture of the city and railroad junction Arnatia were highly appreciated by the Supreme High Command, the party and the government. By the decree of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR, the division was awarded the Order of the Red Banner. On September 24, the division cut the highway Suraj-Klintsy, eliminated enemy strongholds in the area of farms Stary Gutar Venyusha, and by the end of the next day came to the river Iput, where they met organized resistance of the enemy. More than 24 hours the division was delayed at this line. Only having pulled up artillery, tanks, crossing means, the units forced the water barrier. However, they could not advance further. The system of trenches, pillboxes, and bunkers, the enemy entangled hundreds of kilometers of wire, fenced solid minefields. The fatigue of the personnel, a great shortage of men also had an impact. In companies and batteries there were 25-30 men left in the line, or even less, and rear was bogged down in the mud of the roads, which had become muddy from the fall rains. Protracted battles with varying success continued for several days in a row. Day and night regiments stormed the fascist fortifications, pulling back significant enemy forces. Meanwhile, the army and front troops continued to liberate Belarus. following the district center of the Mogilev region Kotemsk, Klimovichy, Kostyukovichy, and on September 30, the city of Krychev were cleared of the enemy. On October 2, the front troops reached the bank of the Soj River, forced the water barrier and captured a bridgehead on the right bank, thus creating favorable conditions for further offensive in the Gomel direction. On October 3, the division transferred its section to the left-flanking units of the 3rd Army and right-flanking units of the 63rd Army, and again joined the 53rd Rifle Corps of Major General Ivan Alexeyevich Gartsev. By evening came the order for redeployment. The division went to the rear, where the personnel began to put themselves in order. Cleaned and repaired uniforms, shoes, washed. Soldiers and commanders wrote letters. Almost for the first time after a 2-month stay on the front line, they had a quiet meal. And what to say? They were glad to have a long-awaited rest. After the rumble of explosions, the whistle of shrapnel, fierce hand-to-hand fights, the death of comrades, blood, after what they had experienced and seen, everyone needed rest. Soldiers, sergeants, and officers. It was necessary to forget, to change the situation, to discuss the past battles, to learn from them lessons and experience for the future. Then the division redeployed near Roslavel. On October 8, the units camped in villages, the names of which are not on all maps: Shumyakshlavsha, Veryoshavichi, Fedorovka, Rogovoy, Chenushki. The units were located in huts, tents, and the replenishment began to arrive. People came mainly from partisan detachments and liberated areas of Belarus. Combat training began. There was the formation of departments, platoons, there were meetings of sergeants and commanders of platoons. Companies, battalions visited the tactical exercises with live firing of the platoon. Company, battalion, classes to run in the young replenishment of tanks. Frontline soldiers shared their combat experience with young people, taught newcomers how to use weapons, overcome wire barriers, attack the enemy. Former partisans told about the fight against the Nazi invaders and their henchmen behind enemy lines, sabotage. In units and subdivisions there was party political work. Party and Komsomol organizations were created, meetings were held, which summed up the results of the past battles. Commanders and political workers had political information. In reports and conversations told the soldiers about the successes of the Soviet Army on the fronts of the Great Patriotic War. If to summarize briefly these successes only in our direction, it should be noted that the troops of the Kalinin, Western and Bryansk fronts crushed the enemy defenses at the front up to 400 kilometers, advanced to the west by 250 kilometers, reached the upper reaches of the Dnieper, entered the eastern regions of Belarus, and in early October reached the frontier south of the settlements of Uzvyataity, Rudnya, Lenin, and further along the rivers Pronya and Soch to Gomel. Radio and newspapers were bringing joyful news every day, so there was a lot to talk about. In early October, the Bryansk front was abolished by the decision of the Supreme Command headquarters. The division, as part of the Corps and Army, was transferred to the Central Front. A memorable event for the personnel was the presentation of battle flags. There were rallies in the units. The division newspaper Chapayevetst telling about the rise among soldiers, sergeants, petty officers, caused by the presentation of banners called Red Banner, Heroes of Bryansk and Uneksha, Let's Liberate Our Native Belarus, and it was, by the way, on the central section of the Soviet-German front great events unfolded. As it became known from newspapers and radio broadcasts, the troops of the Kalinin front, in cooperation with the troops of the Baltic front, were advancing in the Vitebsk direction, covering the Belarusian grouping of the enemy from the north. From the east, in the direction of Orsha and Mogilev, the troops of the Western Front broke through the enemy's defense. From the south, on Gomel and Bobruisk, the right wing of the Central Front was advancing. The personnel of the division did not yet know that they would have to act on this very right wing, and that it had already been assigned a place in the relevant plans of the command. Vacancies and settlings. On a gloomy October day, the division units were leaving the place of deployment. The route passed through the settlements of Roslavel, Vorga, Korsika, Sarash, Klintsy, Novozikov. We were on highways and the weather turned bad. The sky was covered with clouds. It rained in the fall. Rivers, streams and lakes swelled. Water flooded low-lying areas, bridges and crossings. Roads turned into a solid mess. Infantrymen, artillerymen, mortarmen, communicators, medics were pushing vehicles, guns, wagons with ammunition and tools. cursing the heavenly office with all its attributes. In above the battery and regimental columns were heard tearful voices. 1, 2, taken. 1, 2 more taken. Let's go, sweetheart. The cars were jamming in the mud, humming, howling at the highest tones, shaking like in a fever. Horses were straining, snorting, tearing their reins. Only the people could stand it, though sometimes they expressed themselves in such a way that they could not fit into any rules of grammar, but they kept on walking, and not just to go, but to carry on their shoulders cars, wagons, sanitary vans. It was difficult for everyone, but the artillerymen experienced the hardships of broken roads, swampy floodplains, local crossings to the fullest extent, pushing tractors with ammunition, pulling guns out of the impenetrable mud on their hands. The commander of the 261st Artillery Regiment reported to the division headquarters. I was out of the movement schedule. A similar report was soon received from the commander of the 418th Fighter Anti-Tank Division. A participant of those events, Deputy Commander of the 889th Rifle Regiment on political part, Lieutenant Colonel of the Reserve Nikolai Afanasievich Kulyabin recalls about this march. It was as if the weather decided to test us. Heavy rain did not stop for a minute. People were walking, falling knee-deep or even higher into the swampy ground, helping to pull out the stuck equipment, carrying boxes with ammunition, grenades, mines. Everyone was doing their hard soldier's job properly. As if that's the way it should be. That's the way it should be. They used ropes to hook cars and wagons bogged down in the mud, harnessed the exhausted horses, harnessed themselves and dragged everything on themselves, saving weapons, ammunition and property. They threw themselves into the muddy slurry and often hid in it with their heads. In the course of the march, I repeatedly caught myself thinking that the willpower of Soviet people is inexhaustible. Where and in what are the origins of what allows them to overcome superhuman tension? Enthusiasm for the idea, our successes at the fronts. It's all true. We cannot fail to mention here the party political work. Much was done in the course of the task by commanders, political workers, party and comsec. But in my opinion, there was one more thing, without which it is impossible to talk about the capabilities of the Soviet soldier, his known and unknown accomplishments in the name of the fatherland. I mean the distinctive quality of our people, the vigor and strength of their spirit. Late in the morning of November 1, 1943, the rifle regiments of the division concentrated in the forests of the Iputi Bend, near the small Belarusian town of Dobrush. The headquarters was located in the town, the artillery regiment and a separate fighter anti-tank division, which had fallen behind, arrived only late in the evening. Settlement began. The units pitched tents, dug dugouts, equipped them, erected ramparts, covered the walls with dried wood, lined the floors with evergreen spruce lapnik and juniper. Liaison officers pulled strings of coloured cable. Sappers cut logs into planks with hand saws, assembled camp tables and dock frames. Military kitchens were smoking, near which staff clerks, storekeepers, chauffeurs of support units and other, as they called themselves, soldiers intelligentsia were grouped. From the direction of Gomel and its surrounding suburbs, where the front line passed, came a continuous rumble. Sometimes it intensified, as if disintegrated into separate components, and then clearly heard the bursts of large-caliber shells. In these days, the troops of the Belarusian front, which now included the division, continued to cover Gomel from the south, expanding the bridgeheads on the Dnieper captured in mid-October. The German fascist command took urgent measures to prevent further breakthrough of the Soviet troops in the southern regions of Belarusia, hoping to hold Gomel. For the 2nd and 9th German armies, it was the most important railroad junction where their main communications converged. That's why brutal battles continued here. While waiting for the order, the division units put themselves in order. On November 3, the new arrivals were sworn in. On the same day, the Corps headquarters preliminarily oriented the commander about the forthcoming march to the combat area. Chief of Staff Lieutenant Colonel Fedor Fedorovich Abashev, together with his staff, sat down for the development of documents. In the regiments continued assembling units, personnel mustered weapons, entrusted equipment. At this busy time I arrived in the division. Major Rumyantsev, the head of the operational department, short, thin, even rather puny, warned me during the first conversation. Before executing a document, understand what is required. If you don't understand something, ask, said Pyotr Vasilievich. There was nothing to be ashamed of. I conjured up a map or any scheme, calculation, formalized orders, Orders beat out the data from the commanders and headquarters of the units. Calm, diligent, assertive in his work, he forced his subordinates to work in full force by his example. He liked to repeat, to be aware of events, to transmit orders and instructions to units in a timely manner, to control their actions on the battlefield. Clarity and accuracy in the development and execution of documents. These are the main indicators that determine the quality of work of the officer-operator. Rumiantsev never complained about his troublesome position. He would leave the commander or chief of staff after a tough conversation, look at us, sigh and say in a steady voice, "We'll live. We won't die, especially from work." And again for several hours in a row we put on the map the situation, the decision, work out other documents, clarify the data travelling to parts. Peter Vasilievich did not tolerate inaccuracies. He taught to be scrupulous about any case. He asked for mistakes in his own way. Sometimes he would look reproachfully, wrinkle his nose and express his displeasure with a snide question. "You stand there and don't know where to put yourself? And you remembered this conversation for a long time." Once I arrived from the 828th Rifle Regiment of Major Nikolai Viktorovich Krasovsky, reported on the completion of the task. Pyotr Vasilievich asked, "What else did you notice, Alexander Terentyevich, in the defense of the regiment?" It seems nothing more. Once again began to enumerate. 2 battalions in the first echelon, the 3rd in the 2nd Machine Gun and Mortar Company's platoons of Magpies. That's all. Is that so? According to the information we have, on the edge of the forest is located Regimental Battery. To the left of it, attached tank battalion. He kept telling me about the regiment's defense system. It turned out that I did not see even a third of what I had to not only learn, but also to control. Pyotr Vasilievich, noticing my embarrassment, told a parable about how a baron hired a clerk. The peasant had to run 4 times to find out whose wagon was coming, what were the merchants bringing, where to, how much was the goods. "Do you understand the parable?" Pyotr Vasilievich asked me. "I understand, Comrade Major, in attentiveness." "That's right." Rumiantsev smiled and hurried to cheer me up. "Don't be timid, you'll succeed. You like to work. We will help you to master the business and everything will fall into place." I must admit that I liked the staff of the operational department. Here always reigned relaxed working environment. Senior assistants of Major Rumiantsev, Senior Lieutenant Dmitry Lavrukin and Captain Pyotr Gerasimov were sociable, knowledgeable people. They willingly introduced me to the course of staff work. Lieutenant Mikhail Zaporovny, seconded to the operational department, was also responsive. I learned from them the ability to assess the situation, make decisions, calmness, and much more. On November 6 on the radio, we listened to a report on the solemn meeting dedicated to the 26th anniversary of the Great October Revolution. The successes of the Soviet Army on the fronts of the Great Patriotic War and the workers on the home front were impressive. I will not enumerate figures and facts. They are common knowledge. I will only recall the idea expressed in the report of the chairman of the State Defense Committee, Stalin, that the victories of the Soviet troops, won in the summer-autumn campaign, went far beyond the Soviet-German front, changed the entire further course of the World War, and acquired a major international significance. In my memory from these days imprinted a map of the areas liberated by our army, published in the newspaper Red Star for November 5. We rejoiced looking at it. Kiev, Kharkov, Oryol, Taganrog, Bryansk, Smolensk, Stalin, Kursk, Chernigov and many other major industrial centers of the country were cleared of Hitler's invaders. Sir Peter Vasilievich Rumiantsev, habitually rubbing his temple with the palm of his hand, expressed our common opinion that the calculations of German fascism to take revenge for Stalingrad, which were mentioned in newspaper reviews and orders at the beginning of the year, "No, now suck it up, Mr. Hitler. Let's see how you'll sing when the bombs start exploding over your head. War will come to us where it came from." In the afternoon from the Corps headquarters came the order to prepare for the march, and again we went to work. We practiced the routes of advance of regiments, special units, picked up maps, prepared reports. Everything had to be thought over. Everything had to be provided for. In the morning things got a little less busy. I came out of the smoky room and greedily took a breath of fresh air. The November wind had so swept the sky that it seemed I had never seen such clearly defined stars. They burned brightly overhead, clinging to the tops of poplars and the roofs of the houses of the extinct night town. Buildings, sidewalks, tree branches, and even the grass blackened by the rains were blue under the moonlight. And if it were not for the military vehicles, and a sentry walking around the yard with a machine gun behind his shoulder, and the snorting of saddled horses at the stable, it would have been an ordinary picture of a peaceful, weather-beaten autumn night. "Me, Comrade Senior Lieutenant," came a muffled voice behind me. I looked back. A soldier was standing near the porch under a spreading linden tree. Messenger Selivastov. He was of small stature, wearing an ear flap over his eyes, about which the staff clerks had already made more than one barb during several hours of his duty. The soldier nonchalantly endured the ridicule and spread his hands. "What can you do, since I was born so unsleek? I wore small-sized hats in the civilian life, or had them made to order. Or maybe I was making amends for it by being obedient." He had given a new hat, issued the day before, for which the foreman of the commandant's company had to rummage through the nooks and crannies of the division warehouses, to a homeless boy, for which he received a reprimand and a used, seen-it-all hat, a couple of sizes bigger. "Major Rumyantsev is calling for you," said the messenger. "I'm coming." There were officers of the operational department in the room. Pyotr Vasilievich was giving instructions. When he saw me, "See, come closer, Altunin. We're leaving by units. You are to go to Major Zaititz. Check the processing of documents, anti-aircraft support of the march, control the time of the regiment to its direction and the organization of the regulation service." Rumyantsev drew on the map route of the 889th Rifle Regiment, gave it to me with the words, "Is the task clear?" "That's right." At the same time seized the order to the commander. "Now it will be finished." I found the 889th Rifle Regiment in place, but I could feel that it was about to move. The tents had been taken down, the fire of the soldiers' camp kitchens was burning out. The soldiers were fixing the last household goods on the wagons. The petty officers checked the stowage of equipment, hurried up the riders, usually elderly men. Not far away the lieutenant was checking the outfit of the platoon. I came closer. The officer put his hand to his headdress and introduced himself. "Lieutenant Dmitriev, commander of the platoon of foot reconnaissance." "I see that not mounted." "How?" "No horses." Dmitriev smiled. We met. Ivan Zakharovich Dmitriev assigned me an escort to the regimental headquarters. In about 10 minutes we were there. In a small hut of a forest farm was a meeting. After checking my documents, I was allowed into the room. "Sappers will go in the detachment to ensure movement," said the major with large grey eyes. Looking for a dense senior lieutenant, he asked, "I've not forgotten to prepare timber. Pushenikov?" "Not at all, we've loaded it." "That's because last time you let the regiment down badly. Every ditch was a halt. There's not even a track to get us across. You've got to use your head." And those present smiled, and the regiment commander finished, "I hope that this time everything will be all right." "Yes, Comrade Major." "Sit down." The major, reminding those present about the timeliness of reports, let the officers go. I introduced myself and reported the purpose of my arrival. "Hello, Comrade Senior Lieutenant." Major Hare smiled friendly and extended his hand. "So, control and help." "Oh, Rumyantsev, you restless man." "I recognize Pyotr Vasilievich." The major glanced at his watch. "At 40 minutes to the start of the march. Have you had breakfast?" "No." "Neither have I." The Hare called the orderly and gave an order. The soldier went out, but almost immediately the landlady appeared in the hut. A large old woman was breathing heavily. Her grey hair was dislodged from under her black and white polka-dotted shawl. She was in a hurry. With large hands with knotted fingers, she put something wrapped in a towel embroidered with red crosses on the table and tossed the ends aside. An aluminum bowl was opened, filled to the top with steaming potatoes. "Oh, please eat, sons," she said in a sing-song voice. "Why were you, mother, worried?" Hare started. "You don't say. You are going to do such a thing, and I wouldn't feed you. I'll never forgive myself for that." "What kind of business, mother?" Captain Modin, Chief of Staff, broke away from his papers. "Over there." She waved her hand in the direction of the front. "That's right. There. That's what I mean. I'll bring some pickles. I've been pickling them myself." The woman rushed to the door and returned a couple of minutes later with a plate of cucumbers that had not yet lost their colour and smelled of dill. But almost immediately a stout major entered. Let's not offend the hostess, Philip Fedorovitch addressed the commander. Let's have a snack for the road. Yes, have a snack, sons, have a snack. Nukuliabin. My major extended his hand to me. Deputy Commander for Political Affairs. We sat down at the table. The hostess put clean plates. Salt stepped aside and silently sat down on the edge of the bench. Nilda, and you, mother. Kolyabin looked up at her. No, I'll come back later. What's my hurry? That's another matter for you. You might. The woman brushed away her tears, sighed. This did not escape Major Kolyabin. Nikolai Afanasyevich said softly, There's no need to be sad, mother. I'm not taking you to a wedding to bullets. Take care of yourselves, sons. Mothers must have cried their eyes out. I was looking at this simple Belarusian woman, and my mother was standing in front of me. How is she? Maybe she is wiping her tears like that. I received the last letter from Steklienko, which is sprawled freely on my native Omsk land a month ago. My mother, Irina Andreevna, wrote that everything was fine at home. She never complained and instilled this good trait in us children. Mom used to like to watch us coming home from work in the evening with her arms crossed over her chest. Her face would shine with that great inner light, which made her heart light and happy. What are you dreaming about? Philip Fyodorovich Zayats touched my shoulder. I remembered about home. That's good. You can't forget your father's home. It is a part of each of us. And what a part. After saying goodbye to the landlady, we went outside. From the northwest, covering the sky in a semicircle, came a brown cloud. A cold, gusty wind was buzzing in the alleyway, tearing the last leaves from the trees, driving away the withered grass. No way. It was cold again. It's going to rain. No. Take it higher, Oltunin. It's snowing. Philip Fedorovitch turned around. The commander tension rang out from end to end of the farm. The deputy commander, a short, trim and young major, reported to Major Zaitz about the readiness of personnel and equipment. Nikolai Sergeyevich called Philip Fedorovitch Chief of Staff Modin. When did the squad departed to ensure the movement? 30 minutes ago, replied Modin, and glancing at the dial of a wristwatch, added, According to our calculations, the main forces are moving in 50. No, so in 10 minutes we'll move out. Nikolai Afanasyevich, is everything ready? The regiment commander turned to Major Kolyabin. Yes, Philip Fedorovitch, it's ready. It's the treatment of the commander, his deputy for political affairs, Chief of Staff Captain Nikolai Sergeyevich Modin with each other, and with subordinates I liked. The tone was calm, without pressure on the vocal cords. That's why, probably, there was no fuss and nervousness among people. Each of them was busy with his own business. Units of the regiment, strictly adhering to the estimated time, began to move. People's faces were cheerful. On them had not yet laid grey, earthy tinge of fatigue from the march. Scions, companies, battalions clearly and measuredly typed step, went artillery on horseback. In this, marching footsteps guessed coherence and strength of people, joined by the same concerns, thoughts and one desire. It was not easy to keep up the speed of march, to follow through the regulatory boundaries exactly on time. Damp Belarusian peat bog crunched underfoot, and the rain that started soon gradually turned into snow. Overcoats, cotton coats, pants, shoes got wet and hindered the movement. By the evening the snow intensified. That day we felt the first breath of winter. With the onset of darkness we passed through a small farm. The windows of the peasant houses were darkened. The locals were observing camouflage measures. Nearby there was a crossing built by the army sappers, to which dozens of front column routes converged, and not far away, on the other side of the Soch River, there was a front line, and the laws of the front line were in force in the farm. In the approaches to the river, a commandant's service was established. No, do not stop, every now and then reminded units' regulators. Soon the regiment came to its direction. We could return to the headquarters. As a matter of fact, my special intervention was not required. Everything was planned, provided laid out, as they say, on the shelves, starting from the route on the map and ending with breaks and meals for the personnel. The training of staff officers and personally the regiment commander, Major Zaitz. He'd meet a man, stay with him only a few hours, but he remains in your memory for a long time, sometimes for life. I was brought together with Philip Fedorovitch Zayats by the front roads during the episode I have already told you about above. and there were 2 or 3 more short meetings during the offensive that started soon on the western bank of the Soch River. I remembered him by his quick gait, instant reaction, directness in judgments. Philip Fedorovich was always on the move. He tried to do everything himself. Mabit, senior lieutenant, confessed to me at one of the breaks. Since Khalkhin Gol, where you blink there as a rule is a hole, and this war taught me a lot. During the whole march, Philip Fyodorovich Zayats said literally 2 words about himself, and that in passing, comparing the nature of his native Dnipropetrovsk region with local faded colours of late autumn. Only some time later, when I arrived in the regiment as a battalion commander, and Major Zayats at this time has already left with a promotion to a neighbouring division, I learned from fellow soldiers that Philip Fedorovich volunteered for the army. He graduated from the infantry school named after the Supreme Soviet of the RSFSR. For the Khalkhin Gol battles, he was awarded the Order of the Red Star. In the same year, he was early promoted to the rank of senior lieutenant, then followed a promotion. Just before the war, he graduated from the academy. The Great Patriotic War met in the 201st Latvian Rifle Division as head of the operational department. He experienced the bitterness of withdrawal, more than once had to lie under bombardment, to lead the exsanguinated battalions in counterattacks, holding back the enemy to the last. Philip Fedorovich defended the approaches to Moscow. For skillful organization of the battle, personal bravery in the liberation of the city of Borovsk was awarded the Order of the Red Banner. Then the 197th Rifle Corps, battles near Bryansk, Unisha. He was not a slow man, he was not lost in difficult situations. Under the village Mokry Verk, Hitlerites pressed battalions of the regiment to the ground. By personal example, he raised the shooting chains and overturned the enemy. Philip Fedorovich tried not to stand out among surrounding officers by his military past awards. He was modest and, even with his subordinates, took care of them. Set with the approach of the regiment to the Soch River, he sent the officers of the headquarters to the units to check the provision of hot food. A small touch from the regimental life, but it speaks of the important thing, the commander's care for the people. Understand, said Philip Fedorovich. The personnel is tired, sweaty, and even eats dry. What kind of mood can there be? On an empty stomach will not go further, and organize a meal should be in the dark time of day. At dawn, you cannot do much. There won't be time for that. The regimental commander saw it like water. They told me later, at 8 o'clock in the morning the frame appeared, and half an hour later bombers came under the guard of fighters. Anti-aircraft guns rang. The regiment opened small arms fire on the enemy. Here it would not be enough to eat. During the day, raids of enemy aircraft continued at intervals of several minutes. Our pilots would not have time to drive away the fascist vultures as they appeared again. However, the regiment suffered no losses, except for the killed horses from the trophy team. And here was the foresight of the regiment commander. He dispersed the units in advance. That's what he was. The commander of the 889th Rifle Regiment, Major Philip Fyodorovich Zayats. Turning to the division headquarters, I reported to Major Rumyantsev on the fulfillment of the task. Pyotr Vasilevich was satisfied. On my perplexed question, what benefit did I bring to the regiment? He remarks, mainly benefited ourselves. We saw how the staff and the commander worked. You can learn a lot from Hare, a smart, knowledgeable officer. I nodded in agreement. Well, and I said that I wasted a few hours talking. I sent you there on purpose. Now there will be something to compare with in other units. The order to change the front line of the corps, which during the fighting on the right bank of the Soch River suffered significant losses, has not yet arrived. Several days passed in anticipation. In one of them, the division secretly concentrated near the village of Vetka. Now the front line was, as they say, within easy reach. Clearly heard not only artillery cannonade, but also gun and machine gun fire. Finally, the long-awaited order arrived. On the night of November 20, the division on the left bank of the Soch replaced the left flank units of the 96th and right flank units of the 260th Infantry Division. Change took place quickly, without any special complications. Transferring the defense areas, the commanders of the replaced units acquainted us with the enemy's fire system, the latest intelligence data. The fascists did not show much concern. Apparently, they did not know about our movement. The rest of the night and the next day, the 889th and 828th Rifle Regiments, which were in the first echelon of the division, refitted their positions, conducted reconnaissance of the enemy's front line, replenished ammunition, headquarters with the receipt of a combat order to attack prepared documents. Commanders of regiments, battalions, and companies with officers of attached and supporting units, and units conducted reconnaissance work. This time the division was reinforced by 2 tank, self-propelled, artillery regiments, several special divisions and battalions. True, the tank and self-propelled regiments were pretty shabby in previous battles and numbered only a dozen or 2 combat vehicles. We should also mention one more important detail: the regrouping of forces and means by the Corps, partial transfer to us of combat areas of other divisions, significantly strengthened the power of our forces on the Soch bridgehead. In the evening, the order arrived from the Corps headquarters, according to which the division received the task to break through the enemy's defence in the area of farms Novaya Zizn, Zolotoy, to seize the fight of 144.1, Lopatin, settlement, and railway station Kostyukovka. According to the intelligence, in the offensive zone of the division, Hitlerites had time to create large resistance nodes, including engineering structures, pillboxes, bunkers, cut-off positions, solid minefields, a network of wire fences. The terrain favoured the enemy. Riding the hills, the Germans under crossfire held the approaches to the front line. Therefore, the implementation of the upcoming task imposed great responsibility on the organisers of the battle. On the initiative of the division headquarters, the regimental artillery, a battery of the fighter anti-tank division, partly units of the artillery regiment, were attached to the rifle battalions. The artillery was to be used as infantry escort guns. The exception were 2 batteries of 418 IPTAD and a company of PTR. They were included in the anti-tank reserve of the division commander and took up firing positions at the tank dangerous direction, the crossroads of Raduga, Kalche, Kalino. In the division headquarters, regiments, battalions, companies were intensively preparing for the offensive. Commanders, political workers in the course of work, with people used the decrees of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USS on the establishment of the Order of Victory and on the establishment of the Order of Glory I degree published in the central newspapers. In the headquarters of the division held a political information. The head of the political department, Lieutenant Colonel Zhivago, speaking to us. Sink, comrades, in the very word, victory. It embodies the dream of each of us. We are going to it by difficult front roads. In the fire of battles we lose comrades, friends, relatives, but no matter how hard it is, we will win. We will come to it, to the joy of our mothers, fathers, wives, brothers and sisters, the entire Soviet people. By nightfall on November 21, the division was ready for the offensive. Forward regiments took the initial position, artillerymen and mortars, the main positions. Major Konstantin Sergeyevich Lapshin's sappers returned from the front line. They made passes in wire barriers and minefields of the enemy. On the account of the battalion were thousands of neutralized mines, not counting the digging and equipment of trenches, dugouts, various kinds of shelters. And all this in the dark time of the day. When the day came, there was enough work in the rear. We built passages, exits, roads. Whenever I came to them, the sappers were always busy working. Combat Lapshin was hard to find in the headquarters. Konstantin Sergeyevich, short in stature, staid, even phlegmatic to some extent, was usually with people, and therefore where the personnel worked. He listened to me calmly and did not hurry to name this or that data. If something was not ready or he had doubts about something, he asked me to wait, named the terms of fulfillment. There was no need to check him. His words did not disagree with deeds. That's how he remained in my memory. We officers of the operational department of the division met the dawn on our feet, although the Chief of Staff allowed us to rest for an hour or two, nor was our Chief Major Rumyantsev against it. Pyotr Vasilyevich himself continued to check the situation on the map. Looking at him, we also did not stop working. In the morning, the commanders of the attached and supporting units, communication officers, arrived to the headquarters. It was no time to sleep. Before dawn, a little snow fell, the wind dispersed the clouds, and a light frost began to grab the thaw. We rejoiced. If the weather improves, our aviation will have the opportunity to strike at reconnaissance targets of the enemy and objects in the depth of his defense. Aviation support was also necessary from a moral point of view. The fact is that on this small bridgehead for several days in a row were fierce fighting. Having fixed, as already mentioned, on the hills dominating over the terrain, the enemy had time to prepare the terrain in engineering terms, created a good fire system, in addition, had the opportunity to maneuver forces and means. Repeated attempts of divisions of the first echelon of our corps to break through the German defences were not successful. Meanwhile, the command demanded decisive action. It is clear why. By cutting the railroad at Kostyukovka station, we deprived the Nazis of manoeuvre, covered Gomel from the north, the garrison of which continued to hold back the advance of the army. However, our hopes for aviation support were not destined to come true. At dawn the thaw began, the fog began to roll in, rising from the lowlands. And at the beginning of the 8th, the 889th Infantry Regiment received an alarming message. The enemy's leading edge was not visible. Similar news came from Major Nikolai Viktorovich Krasovsky, commander of the 828th Rifle Regiment. Soon our observation post was in a milky veil. Representatives of the corps and the army were worried. Alarm calls began. We did not dare to attack the enemy at the appointed time. An hour passed in languid expectation. The second hour went by. Nervous were commanders, staff officers, personnel on the marching lines for the attack. All languished uncertainty. Colonel Danilovsky did not go to the phones, measured steps back and forth trench, leading from the observation post to the dugout. The calls were answered by the division chief of staff. At about 10 o'clock, he picked up the phone and listened to the caller, surprised interrogation. What to attack? Are you out of your mind, Krasovsky? You can't see anything at 20 paces. Cannon fighters refused to conduct artillery preparation. And after a moment's hesitation, he continued. Let's bring Zabaznov here with your conclusions and suggestions. While the Chief of Staff of the 828th Rifle Regiment, Captain Alexei Prokorovich Zabaznov, reached the division commander's MP. Major Krasovsky's proposal was known to the officers of the headquarters. They say that Krasovsky is used to take the enemy quietly, from around the corner, and now he proposes to go to the machine guns without artillery preparation, hinting at the past of Nikolai Viktorovich. Before the war, he was the head of the Border Guard detachment. But Colonel Danilovsky looked at the officer so much that he hurried to shut up. In about 40 minutes, Captain Zabaznov arrived, tired, in mud-stained boots and overcoat. Captain Levin's battalion, reported the captain to the division commander and the chief of staff. Using the fog, bypassed the Germans' guard, came close to the passage in the enemy's wire fences, and the group allocated for reconnaissance moved further. The Germans are behaving calmly, playing. Playing how? On harmoniums, out of boredom. They're not waiting for us, Comrade Colonel. Levin suggests using the situation to attack without artillery preparation. There is a rational grain in this, said Danilovsky thoughtfully. What do you think, Fedor Fedorov? I think so, replied the chief of staff of the division. What the hell is not joking, as they say. If there was no luck, misfortune would have helped. Allow me to continue, gave a voice Captain Zabaznov. My commander and I propose to attack at 12 o'clock. Why? Major Rumyantsev asked. At 12 the Krauts go to the rear to dine, and the positions remain only on duty. We were warned about this predecessors, scouts of the 260th Division, and we saw for ourselves yesterday. They don't even take their personal weapons with them. What impertinent people, shook his head Lieutenant Colonel Abashev. They are sure that they will not be disturbed, summarized Colonel Danilovsky. That's why they behave carelessly, and thoughtfully shifting his bushy eyebrows to the bridge of his nose. Do you know what thought came into my head? The enemy will probably not wait for us also, because he has recently gotten used to our classic offensive. Morning, artillery preparation. The German is by nature a pedant. Though he learns his lessons, he subconsciously slips back to his principles. So we're going to shake him up, not according to the established canons. I'll report my decision to the commander, and the commander should be informed. I've done it several times. The lieutenant general is dissatisfied. He thinks we're treading water. Fyodor Semyonovich Danilovsky coughed, looked at Captain Zabaznov. You and Krasovsky, thank you. And don't forget to thank Levin and his subordinates for their savvy and sensible suggestions. Zabaznov went out. The division commander looked at his watch and turned to Chief of Staff Abashev. So, at 12. Prepare the order. Krasovsky will start, but let him move out and be ready. Maybe they should attack at the same time. Think it over, Fedor Fedorovich. All right, we'll think it over. It was decided to attack the enemy with 2 regiments. The main attack was made by Major Krasovsky's 828th Regiment, with Captain Levin's and Captain Golovko's battalions in the 1st Echelon and Captain Ivanitsky's battalion in the 2nd. All 3 officers 3 days later were awarded the military rank of major. In Krasovsky's regiment, I happened to be half an hour before the offensive. Calmly, without hurrying, Nikolai Viktorovich was giving the last orders. Captain Ivanitsky's battalion, by landing on tanks and self-propelled artillery units attached to us, is breaking through to the rear of the enemy with the task of suppressing the enemy's artillery and mortar batteries. They are here. Skrazovsky red pencil circled the firing positions of enemy batteries on the map scribbled along and across the coloured pencils. Continued. We will be finishing off the enemy in the first trenches at this time. In his voice there was so much confidence in success that none of those around him doubted that this was how the battle would proceed. And this confidence was transmitted to the soldiers. They were in that state of mind in which a man is on the eve of accomplishment of an important life's work. I looked into the scouts' dugout. The fighters were examining weapons, smoking. One of them started to pull out fresh underwear from his duffel bag, but he was immediately stopped. Are you going to die? Wait, there's still a lot to do, you'll have time. It was obvious that everyone, from the commander to the soldier, lived for the task ahead, believing that they would fulfill it. Deputy commander of the political part of Major Saltykov, passing me a political report. Tell the head of the political department. The task will be accomplished. At 12 o'clock, the regiment went up to the attack. Our appearance in front of the enemy was indeed a surprise for him. Enemy observers and machine gunners on duty in the first trench threw down their weapons and ran. The enemy guard had been removed a few minutes earlier. The soldiers Lavin and Golovko appeared as ghosts in front of the enemy's second trench. Hitlerites were taking food, and at first they did not pay attention to the chain that appeared out of the fog, and when they realized it, they panicked and rushed back to the trench. Some immediately fell under machine gun bursts, squirming in death spasms on the snow-covered ground. Others rushed to the saving rear. Soldiers and commanders chased the fascists, shot them at point-blank range, stabbed them with bayonets, beat them with rifle butts. Russian man is terrible in anger and unstoppable. Sometimes he is not tall enough and not much strength, but he goes straight through, destroys everything in his way. This is the strength of spirit that has been inherent in him for centuries. The strength of spirit gave birth to the heroes of the battles on Lake Pipsy, Kulikovo Field, at Poltava, Borodino Field, and many other battles. It helped us to defeat the fascist hordes at Moscow, Stalingrad, Kursk, on the Now it helped us on this nameless bridgehead near the Soch River. Gradually the battle on the bridgehead took a focal character. Battalions and companies destroyed the enemy in its resistance nodes. But there was in these, at first glance seemingly disparate, actions in common, moving forward from trench to trench, from position to position deep into the enemy's defense. We could hear the voices of guns of different caliber. The Sorokapiatiki were sounding deafeningly, the anti-tank guns, or as they had already been dubbed, Zuraboys, and howitzers were sounding harshly, with some sort of a kanaye. Somewhere in the depths of the enemy's defences, shaking the surroundings, the explosions of RS shells rang out. The Katyusha division attached to us fired a salvo at the advancing Nazi reserves. The division headquarters began to receive data on the results of the battle. Major Zaiti's 889th Rifle Regiment reached the positions of the enemy regimental reserves in less than 2 hours. Krasovsky advanced even further. The 3rd Battalion of the regiment, having pulled ahead with tanks and SARs, continued to destroy manpower and firepower in the enemy rear. Junior Lieutenant Ponomarenko's platoon captured 5 serviceable 6-barrel mortars with a full set of ammunition at the enemy position. Other units, many officers, sergeants and soldiers also distinguished themselves. Komsorg of the 1st Rifle Battalion Senior Sergeant Pyotr Verty raised a company pinned down by enemy machine gun fire in the attack. Private Grigory Pritichenko of the same battalion, dragging his comrades into the attack, destroyed an enemy machine gun with a grenade. Division Commander, Chief of Staff, hurried regiments. Not let the enemy to come to his senses, demanded from Major Zait's Colonel Danilovsky. Snarls. Crush him, before he came to his senses. It's good that the commander of the German division left in his dugout dress uniform with regalia and a frying pan with hot scrambled eggs. Quite murmured into the tube Lieutenant Colonel Abashev. But it's a pity that he himself slipped away. I think you're not going to eat fascist food, Krasovsky. Your task is to go forward and forward. The main thing for us is Kostyukovka, the railroad. Understand? At 16 o'clock the sun came out. The fog began to thin. At first the outlines of juniper bushes and rare birches became visible, then trenches with machine gun nests, trenches, positions of light mortars, blackened equipment left by the enemy, tanks, armoured personnel carriers, assault guns, anti-aircraft guns on the positions, tractors with their blunt noses in the ground. All this was chaotically scattered along the front and deep into the German defences, and all this was almost intact, so swiftly fled the Nazis. That's what surprise means. The enemy defence, which the corps units unsuccessfully stormed for several days, was overcome with little blood. Regiments continued to fight deep in the enemy's defences. By 17 o'clock the farms of Kontorovka, Noviki, Kanitov, Stashki were taken, or rather to say, the places where they used to be located. The fascists completely destroyed all the buildings, and the inhabitants were evicted, the animals themselves scattered in the surrounding gullies. The advance battalions approached the large farms Orel and Ostrov. The neighbours were also beginning to succeed. According to the information coming to the headquarters, the 96th Rifle Division was engaged in street battles in the village of Raduga. 260th Rifle Division, although slowly, but was advancing on the left flank. It seemed that on this day we would continue to be lucky, but alas, we, having sent another report on the advance of the advanced regiments to the headquarters of the Corps and the Army, were already preparing to move to a new command and observation post, when German planes emerged from under the peeping sun. Anti-aircraft installations struck in unison. The frequent clatter of our anti-aircraft guns from the Soj crossing was heard. Junkers, keeping a clear line, passed over the headquarters, divided into two groups, and rushed to the rear of the rifle regiments stretched out in marching columns. They dropped bombs. Deadly cargo hit the target. Having shelled with machine gun fire cars and wagons with ammunition, food, various property, Hitlerites flew away. In about 10 or 15 minutes our bombers appeared under cover of fighters. We looked at the Red Star airplanes with joy. And what was our disappointment when we received a message from Major Krasovsky that our regiment's units, which had broken out ahead, had also fallen under their bombs. To blame the pilots would be unfair. They had not yet received the latest information about the situation of the units. A dear price had to be paid for insufficient communication between ground troops and aviation. While the causes of what had happened were being investigated, calls and inquiries were being answered, the early November twilight descended on the ground. By this time, the advanced units had reached Lopatin, where they were stopped by the enemy. A decision had to be made. Major Rumiantsev sent us to the regiments to clarify the achieved boundaries. I don't remember exactly what time it was, but about midnight I reached the location of the 889th Regiment. While I was looking for the headquarters, everybody said that it was somewhere near, but nobody knew exactly. I was thoroughly cold. At last I met a sergeant communicator, or rather I went out to his grumbling voice. Connecting scraps of wires, he was cursing some. They give me all kinds of greenery before the offensive. They sigh, teach, Semyonov, teach. But when you teach, you have to work, you have to fulfill the task. So you do everything by yourself, so they're all sneezing. Who are you sneezing like that, Sergeant? A series of rockets that flew upwards illuminated me. Who? My aides, Comrade Senior Lieutenant. The sergeant sighed and started splicing the cable end. We laid the wires together. They were hit by one mine. The headquarters was left without communication. The regiment commander promised to organize a bath today. In general, it's all our fault. It's all our fault. And you're back with us again. Have we met before, Sergeant? Yes, we have. You came to our regiment before Soch. That's when I noticed you. Well, if that's the case, take me to headquarters. Now just splice the ends. Semyonov connected the bare parts of the wire and began to quickly wrap them with duct tape. His face and hands, not to mention his boots and overcoat, were covered with mud. Noticing that I was looking at him with interest, he dried Maitner caught in a funnel. At that time the sky was again strewn with rockets. The Krauts are afraid, as if at night they would not scare them away. They are shining, shelling from the heights, pelting them with mines and shells, damn them. But what's the use? They only worry themselves. The sergeant started to argue about the senselessness of fascist resistance, but I hurried him up. Soon we were walking along the path trampled by the communicators, Semyonov in front, followed by me, and then by the machine gunners who accompanied me. Every now and then the sky was coloured by cascades of rockets. Somewhere not far away I heard the rumble of an airplane. "A German frame," explained the talkative sergeant. "Now the illumination will be hung up. The Krauts are cowardly." Soon the flare bombs really flashed. The area was flooded with bluish light. Clearly and distinctly became visible hillocks, hollows, trees, bushes, paths flooded with water in the lowlands funnels. "You can count the needles, comrade senior lieutenant." Marsimonov turned around. "This is not talk, hurry up, while the German conditions creates." In about 20 minutes we arrived at the regiment headquarters. We entered a well-equipped dugout and immediately fell into the rhythm of regimental life. Telephones were ringing. Liaisons arrived from the units with messages. Chief of Staff Nikolai Sergeyevich, listening to subscribers and liaisons on the phone, clarified the position of the battalions. On my appearance only nodded, continuing to do his work. At the back wall of the dugout, the regimental commander was going through some papers on a hastily made camp table. In the corner, on the right side of the commander, was talking about something with the regimental commissars Nikolaev, Major Kulyabin. Nikolai Sergeyevich reminded the commander about the submissions on the distinguished, took his eyes off the papers Major Zayats. No man should remain forgotten. Philip Fedorovich was cheerful and excited. Signing the award relay, the major recalled the details of the episodes of today's battle. "No, whatever you say, Nikolai Afanasyevich," he turned to Major Kulyabin, "but I am satisfied with today. Everyone fought well. Remember Gunnar Mikhontsev? Small stature, stubby little guy? That's him. This puny suppressed 2 firing points, and when the Krauts counterattacked, he stopped the infantry that was trembling. So you're not handsome, and you're small in the bone. Well, and the 7th Company fought on the farm. Didn't they report to you? In a half envelope, they didn't take a step back, no matter how hard they tried to knock them out. I wanted to bring a platoon of machine gunners to help it, but it went on the attack. She chased the German, and she chased him like hell. I've been awarded the Red Army men Soplyakov, Lunev, Melnikov. Why aren't there any sergeants' officers? Nikolai Sergeyevich, ask the battalion commander what the reason is. By the way, why do not see the names of scouts?" Then the conversation between the commander and the chief of staff turned to the system of fire, the preparation of weapons for night fighting, issues of guarding. "Scouts do not for a minute break away from the enemy," reminded the commander of the regiment. "Stay as close to him as possible. It would be good to look in his rear. Now I'll set a task for the scouts." While I mapped the outline of the front line, from the battalions arrived Captains Sergei Yurkov and Anatoly Vohintsev. Political workers confirmed the commander's opinion that the offensive without artillery preparation is out of the question. Meanwhile, senior commanders hurried with the offensive. Returning to the NP division, reported to Major Rumyantsev on the completion of the task and his conclusions regarding the continuation of the offensive. "It's already decided," waved his hand Pyotr Evsilievich. "At dawn the regiments will attack the farms Ostrov and Oral." However, the attack was not successful. Then the enemy threw in reinforcements and began to counterattack at the junction of the 828th Regiment and neighbour on the left, 96th Infantry Division. The spearhead of the fascist blow was directed to the farm Novaya Zhizn, which was defended by a separate company of Senior Lieutenant Veniamin Makurin attached to the division. Tanks, was carried from cell to cell, surrounded, coming in the rear. The roar of the engines could be heard more and more clearly from the flanks of the company position occupied at the fork of dirt roads, not yet recovered from the bombing. With bloodshot eyes, Makurin shouted to platoon commanders into the telephone receiver. "Do not leave the trenches. Throw grenades and Molotov cocktails at the tanks. Cut off the infantry." In these minutes, the battle was already unfolding at the company's position. Anti-tank guns were clicking deftly, machine guns were pouring in fractional oversamples. Tanks, however, stubbornly climbed through. The first 2 crawled out on the berms of the trenches, spun over the cells and went on. Following one of them, a soldier stood up from the trench. He tried it on, threw a bottle with force into the stern and skidded down. The fighting vehicle continued to move, and after it stretched a plume of black smoke. "It's burning." Cut through the rumble of battle, someone shouted. "Beat the Germans. Fight." Our artillery opened fire on the German tanks and machine gunners who had broken into the farm. Makurin joyfully looked back, led a look at the company's defences, and in full lungs shouted, as if in this hellish noise the soldiers could hear him. "No hon, guys? Hold on. All Russia is looking at us." And the guys held on. The wounded did not leave the rifle cells until the German counterattack was smothered, and the Nazis did not retreat, leaving 4 burning tanks and up to 50 dead machine gunners at the company's position. Only then fighters began to dress wounds, bury dead comrades. While Makurin's company repulsed the enemy counterattack, the regiment's repeated attack knocked out the Germans from the farms Ostrov and Orel. The enemy began to retreat. Our units managed to advance another 3 or 4 kilometers, but it was a difficult advance. Almost every meter had to pay with lives. Ahead was Lopatin, a small village, like hundreds of others, scattered across the sand hills of the Belarusian Polisi. The surviving wooden houses looked out at the lowlands that bordered them. The Germans turned the village into a resistance node, and this node turned out to be a very hard nut to crack. Once again we had to wait for artillery to bring ammunition to tanks and saw, and time passed. A short day slipped by unnoticed. From the headquarters of the Corps received an order to seize Lopatino at night. We had to pull up the 862nd Infantry Regiment. However, its battalions were also stopped by crossfire of fascists. The fight lasted all night. The morning of November 23 came cloudy, cold. The Corps and Army headquarters demanded decisive action. The railroad and highway were still in the hands of the enemy, and his artillery continued to bombard our fighting order. The task assigned to the division had not yet been fully accomplished. Commanders and staffs continued to look for the most acceptable option to seize Lopatino, followed by Kostyukovka, but they had not found it yet. During the day the battle was held with varying success, and did not bring significant changes in the position of the parties, except for the fact that the 828th Rifle Regiment of Major Krasovsky, repulsing a counterattack, inflicted serious damage to the Germans. Battalions burned 6 enemy tanks, 4 armoured personnel carriers, destroyed several companies of infantry. The next day did not bring any changes, although the division headquarters set the most decisive tasks before the units. But all the efforts of the regiments came to naught. The enemy's defence was strong and seemed invulnerable. Our attacks met hurricane artillery fire and counterattacks. On the battlefield accumulated out-of-service equipment. In this pile of metal were our 30 checkers. Looking at them, involuntarily thought, did the crews manage to get out, and where are they? These brave guys, always with respect for us, infantrymen, are they alive? Nothing, however, could hold back the spring of our offensive, which had been compressed to nothing. Now it could only unwind. On the night of November 25, by order of the Corps headquarters, regrouping of forces was carried out. The 828th Rifle Regiment transferred its right flank to the neighbouring 96th Rifle Division. The offensive line of our division narrowed, although the task remained the same, to seize the village of Lopatino and the railway station Kostyukovka. I remember, late in the evening we were working on the next report to higher headquarters. Colonel Danilovsky came in, fit, gaunt, seemingly possessing inexhaustible energy. This time Fyodor Semyonovich looked tired. "Would you like some tea, operators?" "With great pleasure," answered Rumyantsev. "Then come on, Pyotr Vasilievich, and make it strong enough to keep you awake. And have tea yourself, distract yourself from your writing." We felt that the commander had not come to see us for tea, and when, stirring the thickly brewed drink with a spoon, Fyodor Semyonovich, as if in between, spoke about Lopatin, we realize the commander decided to consult or check the outline decision. During his short tenure as commander, he had done so many times. He usually began with the words, "Listen, strategists, what do you think?" and laid out the gist of the matter. Now, after a moment of silence, sighed, "Heavens, this Lopatino sits in my liver, and I cannot approach. But still there must be a way out. Maybe we should think together, strategists?" But we suggested. Major Rumyantsev started. "That's not it. I wish we had a couple more options. Let's think, guys, look for the best way to get rid of the Kraut. Lopatino is the key to Kostyukovka. Both we and the Germans understand that. The scouts report that the enemy has no defences, so he's holding on to Lopatino like hell to his soul." After about 30 minutes we offered options, although we is too generalise. The conversation was mainly between Rumyantsev, his assistant senior Lieutenant Gerasimov, Colonel Danilovsky, and soon came into the dugout Chief of Staff of the division, Lieutenant Colonel Ebashev. Fyodor Semyonovich rejected some proposals at once, asked to think about others, and having thought about them, disagreed with others. And when it seemed that all options have been exhausted, Pyotr Vasilievich Rumyantsev, as if remembering thoughtfully, there is one more option. True, I already suggested it a day ago, but then Lieutenant Colonel Abashev did not agree with me. Well, that was then, smiled Fedor Fedorovitch. Time flows, the situation changes. Come on, what you have there, Pyotr Vasilievich, lay it out. So I proposed a strike at the height of 141.6. Major Rumyantsev pushed the map to himself, and, pointing with a sharp pencil on the converging lines of deposits at the top of the height, continued. According to the data we have, the Germans here are not so large forces, and in engineering terms, it is equipped with weaker than the approaches to Lopatino. With one regiment we break through the defences here and further on to Yeremino, hanging over Lopatin from the west. The Germans are frightened by the encirclement. They will start to transfer forces and means to Yeremino, then the rest of the forces and hit the enemy from the front. Well, Tway stretched Danilovsky, Noi so from the flank. There is something in it. What's your opinion, Fedor Fedorovitch? In this area we have not yet tried to break through, Fedor Semyonovitch. Ye after a short pause said Lieutenant Colonel Abashev. All more stormed Lopatilo. I think that under the circumstances in the proposal of Major Rumyantsev as a rational grain, this option should be thought over, weighed. At that time the door of the dugout owned it. There you are, and came a voice from the doorway. On the catcher and the beast runs. Colonel Danilovsky smiled happily. You're easy on the wrist, Pyotr Grigorievich. I wanted to send for you, but you came yourself. Can you guess your thoughts from a distance? What a distance. I barely fought off the phone calls. They're all asking from above, have they taken Lopatino? God damn it. They all want you and Fyodor Fedorovitch, but the duty officer says. They've left for the regiment. He told me at once where you were, so I decided to come here. Come in, Pyotr Grigorievich, come in. It seems that the operators found a clue how to outwit the Kraut and take this very Lopatino. The chief of the political department sat down on a crate of shells, wiped his face with the palm of his hand. Fedor Semyonovitch Danilovsky outlined the essence of the proposal. Nertui, said Peter Grigorievich Zhavego, I am in favour of it with both hands. Who will we prepare for the breakthrough? 862nd Kozevnikov. The regiment has fewer losses than others, and did not have time to distinguish themselves in this offensive. All this is true, said Lieutenant Colonel Abashev, but as if Kozhevnikov would not make a mess. Maybe we trust Krasovsky. Nikolai Viktorovich will measure 10 times, but rest assured we'll cut off exact. Major Koznikov Hot turned to Fedor Fedorovitch, the head of the political department. And what do we do? Let's run him, teach, educate. We will not keep until Berlin in the second echelon. And we need a man with fire for this job. Peter Grigorievich was silent, sipped a sip of already cooled tea from the offered mug and continued. Let's entrust Kozevnikov with the breakthrough. I've just been at his place. I was glad to see people. Angry as devils, do not want to tread on the ground, rushing into battle. In this I see the work of the commander, his staff, political workers. By the way, Deputy Commander Kozevnikov Kuzma Ivanovich Kuznetsov is a balanced man. I think that they complement each other. So the time allotted for the preparation of documents flew by quickly. Major Rumyantsev with the finished papers went to the Chief of Staff. Peter Gerasimov and I also came out of the dugout. The front line was silent, only from time to time. Then from our side, then from the German side of the rockets flew up and clattered duty machine guns. Me has calmed down. The Gerasimov nodded in the direction of the enemy after a short pause. All day long he was firing. What a day! Consider since the 21st continuous rumbling from his and our side, I thought my eardrums would burst, especially on the 22nd when fascist planes were bombing us. It's all right. I endured it and will endure it again. A man gets used to everything. I keep asking you, Oltunin, don't you feel attracted to people? You guessed it, I do, and how? Well, I'm like that rivet. I feel I don't belong here. You can learn a lot from us. Danilovsky, Abashev, Rumyantsev, the division service chiefs are knowledgeable men. To be with them for a month or two is like completing your higher courses. The only difference is that here everything is in practice. As our Rumyantsev likes to say, we gain experience on the edge of a knife. That's true. Today's conversation will be remembered for a long time. School? And what a school! I used to think that it was easy for a regimental commander at the front, and there's nothing to say about the commander and staff officers. Not like us, company and platoon, day and night have to plough the front line. Now I realized they have their own front line, and even worse than ours. You have to work with your head more and more, not with your throat. And before we shout there, a forward to the attack, or forward for the motherland, they will think for us many times, weigh what will come out of our shout. That's how things are. Our conversation was interrupted by Major Rumiantsev. Are you complaining about your fate? Well, well, cry in your sleeve. And a little quieter. I understand you guys. Pyotr Vasilievich sighed, waved his hand and went to the dugout. I wrote several reports. Gerasimov nodded after him, asking to be released from the staff work. They promise, but they keep dragging it out. At that time, to the left of Lopatin soared up a series of multicolored rockets. After it, the second, third. From there came the deafening rumble of machine gun and machine gun fire. After that, the Nazi batteries rumbled. Ours struck in response. An artillery duel began, in which more and more firepower from both sides was included. The sky lit up with bluish-dotted tracer bullets. Major Kozhevnikov is on the move. Yes, he's on time. For some time we were still looking at the fire flashes of the leading edge. They grew and shrank, but they did not fade for a second, picking out from the November darkness trees, bushes, hillocks, trenches, pieces of trenches on the field ploughed along and across. On the left flank, where, according to our calculations, the breakthrough began, they shone brighter and went deep into the German defences. The Gerasimov Altunin, came the voice of Major Rumiantsev from the open door of the dugout. We hurried to Pyotr Vasilievich. The major held the telephone receiver to his ear with one hand. With the other he was writing something quickly on a blank sheet of paper, from time to time repeating, "Yes, yes, I'm listening." After about 3 minutes, Rumiantsev hung up the receiver. Pyotr Vasilievich's face was joyful. That's it, boys. Kozhevnikov had captured the first and second trenches. Now the battle has spread to the third. The Krauts didn't wait here, they didn't. We didn't know the details of the breakthrough, and Rumiantsev, mapping the situation, familiarized us with them. The front battalions of the 862nd Infantry Regiment approached the enemy unnoticed. The fascists withdrew their combat guard. They were frightened by the actions of our divisional and regimental reconnaissance, which the day before managed to capture several prisoners. Our scouts, taking advantage of this, imperceptibly for the Nazis led battalions close to the first trench. There followed a short artillery attack, and in front of the enemy, as if from under the ground, appeared shooting chains. While the Germans came to their senses, the units took the trench, and, without stopping, rushed further. Meanwhile, the third enemy trench, running along the crest of the height, was being hammered by our artillery, and the regimental mortars were firing at the firing positions of the batteries located behind the back ridge and ammunition depots. The attack continued. Taking advantage of the enemy's turmoil, Kozhevnikov advanced a platoon of foot reconnaissance with sappers to the rear of the Germans. The scouts, having blown up a warehouse with fuel, increased the panic in the rear of the fascists. To the place of breakthrough Hitlerites, began to throw reinforcements, denuding and already exhausted by previous battles of defense areas near Lopatino. This was what we needed. After waiting for some time, the 261st Artillery Regiment fired on the enemy positions, especially on its flanks. Soon it was joined by the 418th Separate Fighter Anti-Tank Division and artillery of the 828th and 889th Rifle Regiments. The enemy's firing points identified during the day were destroyed. His observation posts were destroyed, and communications were disrupted. The last salvos were especially effective. An attached division of Katyushas joined the artillery preparation. RS salvos on the squares literally swept away the flailing Hitlerite soldiers. After half an hour of artillery preparation, the 828th and 889th Regiments went on the attack. In the meantime, Kozhevnikov's regiment seized the height 141.6 and continued the attack on Yeremino, creating an opportunity not only to bypass Lopatino from the west, but also to cut off the enemy's escape routes. The commander of the 862nd Rifle Regiment, Major Kozhevnikov, used every opportunity to successfully accomplish the task. After mastering the height, Vasily Antonovich turned the right flank battalion to the north, which finally tipped the scales in our direction. Scattered enemy units hastily retreated to Kostyukovka. On the heels of the moved forward units of the regiment, the fate of Lopatino was decided. True, the enemy tried to stop us at the very settlement, but when he realized the futility of his persistence, set fire to the buildings and left the village. However, the battalions that broke into the village, to the delight of the inhabitants, managed to defend some huts from the fire. At dawn, with an assignment from Major Rumyantsev, I found myself in Lopatino. Deep pits and funnels, trees torn out from the roots, roofs of houses blown off by explosions and shell casings, many fresh shining shell casings, from small pistol casings to large artillery casings. In the roadside ditches were the hulks of burned-out cars, twisted iron that used to have its own shape and purpose. But now it was hard to recognize what this or that pile of metal had been before. The locals shoveled the smoking logs, extinguished the smouldering charcoal. An old woman sobbed over the body of a young woman. "Who did you leave me for, an orphan?" Nearby, a child of about 7 years old lay in a pool of blood. They say that they ran into the cellar. An elderly soldier stopped next to me. And the Krauts shot them with a machine gun. I can't say anything. A beast. What senseless cruelty, I thought. We are soldiers, but what do they have to do with it? Women and children. I turned around and went to look for the regimental headquarters. The old woman continued to shout over the bodies of her daughter and grandson. People were carrying their surviving household goods. Troops were marching through the village. Our offensive in the direction of Gomel continued to overflow with spring floods. Troops and units wedged into the enemy's defense lines, cut them, and only then the general success of the liberation of the Belarusian lands was marked. The operation to encircle Gomel, the regional center of Belarus, was coming to its logical conclusion. The Soviet armies, advancing to the northwest, covered it with a ring. The situation of the enemy grouping in this area was becoming more and more difficult. After a desperate 2-day struggle, writes about these events Kurt Tippelskirch, the Army Command was forced to report that the human resources of the army are on the verge of complete exhaustion, that the barrier south of Gomel broke through, and the army does not have forces with which to stop the Russian troops broke through and close the resulting gaps. In the rear of the enemy in this direction, the guerrillas intensified their activity. Enemy trainloads with equipment, weapons, and manpower were falling under the siding. Many railroad bridges were blown up. For example, only in a small place, Gorvo, the People's Avengers killed more than 150 fascist soldiers and officers, captured 110 vehicles with military cargoes, and held this settlement until the approach of the Soviet army units. The command of the German fascist army could not stabilize the situation. Units and units of the enemy, despite strict orders, continued to withdraw, suffering losses in manpower and equipment. At dawn on November 25, the advanced units of the division came to Kostyukovka and fought for the village, while the command was pulling up artillery, and the infantry was concentrating for a decisive rush. Divisional scouts of Major Valentin Korotayev bypassed the station from the flanks and saddled the railroad Gomel-Zojlobyn. The railroad Gomel-Netiantinkovichi was cut by the Soviet units 7 days earlier. The task set before the division was actually accomplished. The last railroad artery feeding the enemy in Gomel and its suburbs ceased to operate. The enemy's armoured trains were forced to withdraw to Zlobin, and now their artillery could not support the half-enveloped garrison of the city. By a simultaneous attack of 3 rifle regiments, supported by artillery, tanks, and self-propelled guns, the railroad station and the village of Kostyukovka were taken. The station tracks were clogged with echelons with equipment, weapons, ammunition, military equipment, which the Germans did not have time to send to Gomel, or at least unload to reinforce the local garrison. There were also trains with grain, potatoes, vegetables, and other products looted from the local population. In one of the trains was locked cattle. Several steam locomotives stood under steam. The station buildings were drowned in smoke and fire. Wagons were burning, ammunition was bursting, cows were mooing, pigs were squealing, sheep were bleating. Soldiers, sergeants, officers of the regiments, who had not yet cooled down from the battle, were saving the people's good. Now, faster, guys, faster. Major Nikolai Ivanitsky hurried his subordinates. Here are boxes with shells. Come on, let's push on. Actually, the wagon rolled slowly, humming and crackling, throwing sparks. As soon as the soldiers rolled it to the reserve track, Ivanitsky shouted at the full force of his vocal cords. March! The men had no time to run away even 100 meters. as the explosion rumbled. At the place where the car stood, the rails were shattered, and the heavy wheels together with the axles were thrown 50 meters away. The roof and iron corner posts were twisted beyond recognition and thrown in different directions. The looted people's goods and cattle were handed over to representatives of the local authorities. The offensive continued. On this day, the left flank formations of our Belarusian front approached Gomel from 3 sides and fought in the streets of the city. In the morning, the first regional center of Belarusia was cleared of the Nazi invaders. By order of the Corps headquarters, the front of the division's offensive was slightly changed. We were assigned the task to clear from the enemy a section of the railroad towards Zeslabin with adjacent settlements. We had to force a small, full-flowing river User with its swampy eastern bank. On the western bank, overgrown with dense forest, according to the testimony of prisoners, the fascists had time to organize a system of fire to equip trenches of full profile with all the engineering attributes. The attempt of the advanced battalions to force the User from the start was not successful. Caught under heavy artillery and machine gun fire and under bombardment, the units were forced to withdraw to the original position. We had to wait for the dark time of day. In the evening, having regrouped forces and means, the units again began to fulfill the assigned task. During a short but powerful artillery preparation, several rifle companies managed to overcome the water barrier. The road to success for the infantry was paved by divisional and regimental scouts. Under the cover of artillery cannonade, they managed to remove the duty shifts of observers. Machine gunners and machine gunners of the enemy spread out along numerous branches of trenches, pelted with grenades the Germans sheltered from the artillery fire. With the end of the artillery preparation on, the general signal companies rushed forward, deep into the enemy defences. In the meantime, all new units crossed to the other side of the river. The Germans began to withdraw in a northwestern direction. Do not give the enemy a break. Hurried us Corps headquarters to create new lines of defense. Slowly advancing, time and again, repeated in the telephone receiver commander. We need to pass as much as possible before dawn. What about dawn? He interrogated Major Kozhivnikov. Don't you know, Vasily Antonovich? Today will be repeated. The aviation will come and you'll be like on a poop. Understand? That's right. Our task is to take the villages of Morozov-Shenir and Potapovka. Then the forest begins. Colonel Danilovsky had no sooner put down the phone, as the phone rang again. Lieutenant Colonel Abashev, Chief of Staff, came to the phone, calling his call sign, calmly said, "Yes, I'm listening to you." As the expression of Fyodor Fedorovich's face changed, it was easy to guess something had happened. His right flank lay low. He ran into a minefield. Reports that he's suffering losses. Jumping mines. He can't do it on his own. And the Springminen, or bouncing mine, was well known to us. Its metal casing contained a cylinder filled with 36 shrapnel balls. 3 fuses were screwed into the top cover, 1 pressure-acting and 2 tension-acting. When the protruding tendrils were moved, the charge threw the mine up to a height of 1.5 to 2 meters, where it exploded, striking people within a radius of 15 to 20 meters with balls. This surprise had to be experienced by units of the 889th Rifle Regiment. Danilovsky looked for someone with his eyes and, not finding. Where is the divisional engineer? On UZ. Assigned regiments came up, forcing the river. He's helping. Tell him. Sep immediately a company of sappers to Major Zaid's. Tell him what they'll be dealing with. We had to advance in extremely difficult conditions. The bogs had thawed because of the thaw. The streams with thick alder bushes along the banks became difficult to pass. Artillerymen, mortarmen, not to mention tankers, fell behind. The infantry marched without stop. Riflemen, machine gunners, having left in the care of petty soldiers belongings and stuffed their duffel bags with cartridges and grenades, rushed forward. And still the rifle units were moving slowly. Not as we and higher headquarters wanted. However, it was impossible to blame the commanders, especially the personnel. The enemy, using every opportunity to delay us, fought to the last. The entire burden of fighting with him fell on the shoulders of infantrymen, anti-tank rifles, grenadiers. That's what we had to beat the enemy out of the pillboxes and bunkers. At dawn, the 889th Rifle Regiment broke the resistance of the fascists in the village of Morozovshchina. Regimental Commander Major Zayats reported his decision to take possession of Potapovka. The commander listened to him, clapped Decided to bypass the village on the left and hit 2 battalions from the rear? Act, but do not forget about the flanks. Leave at least a platoon to cover. And anti-tank gun crews. I will. Scouts report. From the direction of Budo Koshelevo, we hear the rumble of German tanks. We don't know how many, but we'll know soon. We're already taking measures here. There's a battery of Iptadovs on the way to you. Your 40-50 tanks are about to catch up. Stand. The maneuver of the 889th Rifle Regiment succeeded. The units broke into the center of Potolovka. Lev Levin's battalion of the 808th Regiment also fought for the northern outskirts of the village. The 862nd Rifle Regiment fought west of the village. From the boundary of Potanovka, the regiments did not advance. The enemy brought reinforcements and began to counterattack. For 2 days, the division units repulsed the onslaught of the enemy. 2 days ceaselessly roared machine guns. Machine guns, the air shook from the bursts of bombs and shells. 2 days, Nazi tanks were burning. For 2 days, the Corps Commander Major General Ivan Alexievich Gartsev demanded, "Hold on, grind down the enemy's manpower and firepower, not a step back." And we held on. The 862nd Rifle Regiment, during the first 2 hours, repulsed 3 enemy counterattacks. The last one was especially persistent. 24 tanks, armored personnel carriers with infantry, 4 assault guns piled on Captain Ivan Kuznetsov's battalion. It seemed that in this fiery mass of fire there should have been nothing alive. But from the trenches and dugouts, which had collapsed from the explosions, crumpled by the tracks of the vehicles, soldiers were rising. They came up with grenades and bottles with fuel mixture, weapons. They tore Krupp steel, burned the praised Nazi equipment, shot enemy soldiers and officers at point-blank range. They were killed themselves. The enemy's superiority in equipment and manpower was too great. The regiment commander helped the battalion as much as he could. Here already fought Peterovsky, had the NP worried about the outcome of the battle. Notwithstand Kuznetsov, took away from the eyes binoculars deputy commander for political affairs. The Krauts will crush him. Your namesake, Kuzma Ivanovich, will endure. Kozhevnikov turned to him. That's what he was put there to withstand. And yet it is necessary to help him. Vasily Antonovich. I myself see that it is necessary, but with what? You and I have a company of machine gunners in reserve, and the battle is still ahead of us. And after a moment's hesitation, he continued. Okay, we'll send a platoon of machine gunners. I need to go there too. You're a restless man, Kuzma Ivanovich. Go, but take care of yourself. Stay out of the way. Major Kuznetsov on the way joined the platoon of machine gunners, clerks, communicators, everyone who met on the way. Even the wounded, he didn't order them. No, but it so happened that the communists' Komsomol members and after them, and everyone who could hold a gun, followed the political commander. Solid replenishment joined Kuznetsov's battalion at a critical moment of the battle. The enemy was thrown back with great losses for him. The regiment did not take a step back, just as stubbornly fought all parts of the division. On December 1, according to the order of the Corps Commander, we surrendered the Singh and took the defence strip of the 323rd Bryansk Rifle Division. Regrouping was due to the fact that the neighbours in previous battles suffered heavy losses. The change took place quickly. The division was tasked to break through the enemy's defences at the line north of the village of Potopovka, southeast of the farm Muravey, height at 146.0. The terrain was full of swamps with stunted bushes. It was drizzling rain all the time. We looked forward to frost and grumbled about the slushy winter. We walked in wet clothes and shoes all the time. There was nowhere to dry off, even in the rear, and there was nothing to speak about the front line. All day of the first day, and on the night of December 2, there were preparations for the breakthrough. The division's attached forces and means occupied the allotted places. Artillery was shooting. Commanders conducted reconnaissance work, coordinated issues of interact. There was a redeployment of the rear. We practiced documents. Again and again clarified the initial position of the regiments for the breakthrough. Major Rumyantsev several times travelled to the front line. Not easy to give us a breakthrough, shook his head Peter Vasilievich. The enemy hooked firmly. In these days we got information that the Nazis have transferred here significant forces and means from other directions. But this information, were fragmentary. Arriving from the rear of the enemy reconnaissance groups brought nothing new. And only afterwards we learned that Hitler's command, fearing the successful advance of the Soviet troops to Zlobin and Rogachev, transferred to this area 5 infantry divisions from near Mosa, 2 infantry divisions and an SS brigade. This helped the enemy to stop the advance of the front troops. By the end of November, the front stabilized at the boundary of Chozy, Novi Bykov, east of Rogachev, Streshin, and further along the Pripyat River southeast of Mosia. Battles for improvement of positions began, tense and difficult. For more than 10 hours, the division broke through the defense north of Potopovka, reaching the line east of the farms Vyatoy, east of Pereslaya. The northern outskirts of the village Pavomasky advanced only 3 or 4 kilometers. True, by dawn the regiments were able to wrest from the enemy another 2 kilometers and push him back to the western bank of the Okra River. I did not misspoke when I used the word tear out. That's exactly what happened. Fierce battles broke out not only for advantageous lines and settlements, but also for almost every meter of land. We lost many officers, sergeants and soldiers. Captain Ivan Prozverkov, Senior Lieutenant Andrei Starchikov, Lieutenant Markali Kirpe-Isov, Junior Lieutenant Alexander Polin died a brave death. Junior Lieutenant Vasily Koptemir, the commander of the battery of 76mm guns, repelled the enemy counterattack to the last shell. And when the Nazi tank, which broke through to the position, began to crush the silenced guns, the officer got up, in a shredded overcoat, bleeding. He squeezed out of himself. "You won't get through, you bastard." Gathering the rest of his strength, the junior lieutenant threw a grenade under the track of the tank and lost consciousness. He was found here in a pool of blood. Nearby stood a steel fascist hulk with its caterpillar splayed out. Sinza forest village with a tiny railroad station, Staraya Rudnya, comes to mind. To be more exact, only one name remained from the village and the sten. Being in the center of the front events, Staraya Rudnya underwent such changes that even the natives did not recognize it. Instead of neat Belarusian huts, there were charcoals or ruins. Many houses were dismantled by fascists for engineering constructions. The outskirts and streets of the village were ploughed with trenches, communication lines, craters from bombs. The attempt to take Staraya Rudnya from the start was not successful. Our units were met with heavy rifle and machine gun fire, lay down and began to entrench. Commanders reporting complained about the superiority of the enemy in manpower and equipment. Major Krasovsky called. The 828th Regiment had broken forward and now lay down under dagger continuous enemy fire. "Losses do not bear, Nikolai Viktorovich," interrogated the division commander. "It's not good. We need to make sure not to lose people. About artillery cannot help. There is nothing. Lagged behind. Get out of the situation on your own." Yes, with our own forces, Nikolai Viktorovich." Fyodor Semyonovich Danilovsky hung up the phone, stood up from his camp chair, looked under the crowns of pine trees standing nearby where the sappers were building a platform at some distance from the ground. "Can you see the regiments well?" he asked. "Yes, Comrade Colonel," answered the mustachioed sergeant. "Everything is like in the palm of your hand right here." "Hurry up," said the commander. "Let's finish, Comrade Colonel," said the sapper, continuing to work with an axe. The commander of the reconnaissance company arrived. While the driver killed the engine of the trophy motorcycle, the senior lieutenant reported. "We barely got through. The enemy stands everywhere tightly, except for the southeast, in the lowlands a little less frequent engineering structures, but there is water all the way to the ravine." Where? Colonel Danilovsky became animated. "Right here." The officer showed the corner of the forest on the map. "Let's go and have a look from the heights." Invited the company commander to the improvised NP. Studying the terrain, Fyodor Semyonovich asked the officer about something for about 10 minutes, then invited Lieutenant Colonel Abashev. Now the 3 of them were already looking at the southeastern part of Staraya Rudnya. "In your proposal, Fyodor Fedorovich, there is a rational grain coming off the platform," said Danilovsky. "Give the scouts the task to check the approaches to the village from the southeast once again." Danilovsky approached the artillery commander, Colonel Koputenko. "Well, God of War, where are your gunners? You let us down today. Oh, how you let us down. You're cutting them without a knife." Koputenko waved his hands. "I can't help it. I've been seeing that since this morning. I want batteries." "Comrade Colonel," the signalman ran up. "Major Zayats is on the phone for you." "Are you holding on, Philip Fedorovich?" Danilovsky answered the phone. That's good. What? Counter-attacking tanks? Don't let them through. Burn them. Burn with your own forces and means. I can't get you anything yet. I don't have any. Take an example from the neighbor. Krasovsky is more difficult. We have to hold back on 3 sides. Get in line with his flank. I expect good news from you, Philip Fedorovich. Fyodor Semyonovich put down the pipe, brushed the sticking pine needles off his epaulette. He was clean-shaven, his white cuff collar peeped out from under the collar of his uniform, and his boots glistened. Despite the fact that he had been on his feet for more than 24 hours, he looked cheerful. He worked, as usual, calmly and measuredly. He received information from the regimental commanders, gave them instructions, listened to the officers of the headquarters and officers from the parts, took his time to express his opinion on this or that issue, with everyone was even and tactful. One of the senior chiefs called and, apparently, began to reproach the artillery commander of the division. Fedor Semyonovich objected. Colonel Kaputenko and his staff are not alone to blame. I was also negligent. I trusted the maps. It turned out according to the proverb. It was smooth on paper, but we forgot about the ravines and to walk on them. We didn't take into account the slush. Now we're paying the price. We're pulling up the artillery. Notice Semyonovich. Colonel Kaputenko came running up out of breath. An officer from the Uptadovs has arrived. 2 batteries are in place. No good. It already means something. Danilovsky looked at the artillery commander, noticing that the colonel did not report everything. Asked, "What else have you got there?" He contacted the commander of the artillery regiment. The 1st Division is about to be here. The 2nd and 3rd. Good. The commander smiled and turned to the chief of staff. Fyodor Fedorovich, have you received any information from the scouts yet? They just reported. The old information is confirmed. Then, Colonel Danilovsky looked at his watch. Prepare a combat order to Zayits and Krasovsky. Regiments to attack in an hour and a half. More need to strengthen Krasovsky, came the head of the political department. He suffered heavy losses. It's hard for him, and here we have to attack. Reinforce. Colonel Danilovsky thought for a moment. No, I can't help in any way. Danilovsky found Abashev with his eyes. Fedor Fedorovich, fighter anti-tank batteries and artillery regiment division to subordinate to Kozhevnikov, to him to transfer attached to us tankers and a company of machine gunners. Standing next to the commander officers were silent. On their worried faces was evident that they have not yet understood the commander's plan. It was quite obvious. If the main blow is struck by the 828th and 889th Rifle Regiments, then it is where you need to send reserves. However, none of the staff did not dare to oppose Danilovsky. So Fedor Fedorovich, after a moment's pause, continued, Commander, will to Kozhevnikov and personally set the task. You will start on my signal in 40 minutes as soon as Zayats and Krasovsky will attack, and already to eye. But Krasovsky and Zayats make a diversionary strike, so to speak, forcing the enemy to get bogged down in the battle. That's when Kozhevnikov will strike. From the southeast of Staraya Rudnya, the enemy is least likely to expect us. There's a flooded meadow, a river. He hopes we'll hardly dare to attack from there. But even now, not all officers were not in agreement with the commander's plan. It's the fact that Major Kozhevnikov had to make a march. Although small, but in the conditions of slowing is not easy. On the flank had to move and artillery. The enemy could notice the maneuver and figure out the plan. You doubt it, smiled Danilovsky. Well, and rightly so. There is a risk, and after a pause. But understand, the Nazis are waiting for our attack head-on. They will get it, and then they will not be to Kozhevnikov. Right, Pyotr Vasilievich. Major Rumyantsev shrugged his shoulders. You're being cautious, operator. It's not like you. The colonel wrinkled his nose, hesitated, apparently evaluating his decision once again, and after a minute or two he said, everyone to their places. Major Rumyantsev, take the place of the Chief of Staff, take the reins in your hands. We have a lot of work to do today. Lieutenant Colonel Abashev until the end of the battle will be at Kozhevnikov. Fedor Semyonovich Danilovsky went up to his observation post and again began to consider the landscape spread out before him. At this time, from the command post reports, the corps commander arrived. A passenger car drove up. Major General Gartsev came out of it on the thawed snow, threw a glance at the decking on the pines, What kind of a chicken coop is this? They'll think of it. You can see better from here, Comrade General, explained Danilovsky, climbing down the steep ladder. You don't take care of yourself, Fyodor Semyonovich. Even Alexeyevich Gartsev said reproachfully. The Germans are just waiting to kill you. You've spoiled them. Oh, and spoiled them. From Bryansk Scouts report. The Krauts have you on their radar. You'd better watch out. It's not a matter of hours. Beds don't go into the forest to fear the wolves. I know the saying. Gartsev waved his hand. Report the situation. Why is still not taken Staraya Rudnya? Division commander invited Major General Gartsev to the map. Let's look first from above. Gartsev showed us on the planking. We involuntarily smiled. Comcorps had just scolded Danilovsky for neglecting danger, and now he was doing the same. Soon they were surveying the terrain. From the fragments of phrases that came to us, we realized that Comcorps approves of Fyodor Semyonovich's idea. It's not a bad idea, stepping down from the deck, continued Major General. The Germans are sure. If the advantage is on our side, we will act straightforwardly. Thank you for your cleverness. But for the fact that the artillery did not arrive in time, we will still... Where's your artillery commander? He's moving fighter anti-tank batteries and a division to Kozvnikov. You'll have to ask me, Comrade General. Are you sorry? We say God is God's man and Caesar is Caesar's man. Naturally, we won't leave you out, Fyodor Semyonovich. Ivan Alexeyevich sat down on a camp chair, looked at Danilovsky. Go about your business, or else you'll say that the commander has torn you away from the organization of the battle. I'll stay here for a while. I'll see how the issue with Staraya Rudnya will be solved. And a little choir, things are not going well with your neighbor. The enemy is pulling back hard. The division commander heard the Chief of Intelligence Major Valentin Korotayev, Divisional Engineer Major Daniil Litvinov, Chief of Communications Major Alexei Ovchinnikov, on the phone received a report from the artillery commander. Exactly at 15 o'clock, 828th and 889th Rifle Regiments began the attack. The enemy met the head battalion's dense fire, and after 15 to 20 minutes himself went into counterattack. Who of the commanders does not know how agonizing these minutes? You mentally check yourself. Did you think everything through? Did you assess the situation correctly? Did something important fall out of sight? Colonel Danilovsky experienced something similar, helping Major Rumyantsev. I saw how worried the commander was, although he tried not to show it. Fyodor Semyonovich well understood that the subordinates do not care how the commander in a difficult situation. His composure always inspires respect. Sadly, the division commander was, as usual, calm, but the inattention slipped out. Here, Ops, in anxious anticipation, looks at Major Rumyantsev and finally could not stand it. What is it, Pyotr Vasilievich? Krasovsky reports. The company of anti-tank guns was surrounded by fascists. Lieutenant Islamov. Yes, him. The PTers are covering the right flank of the regiment. They set fire to 2 tanks and 4 armoured personnel carriers. But the enemy is advancing. Will they hold out? It's not the first time for Islamov. He'll hold on. A faint smile slipped across the worried face of the division commander. Apparently, he remembered a recent meeting with a young officer, the mischievous gleam of his black eyes and his confident voice. Don't worry about us, Comrade Colonel. Our men are reliable, many times tested in battle. They will not let us down. And there's nothing to talk about anger at the German. Almost everyone has his own wound. Let him pay attention to the right flank. Help Islamov. Remind him also about presenting the lieutenant, platoon commanders, especially distinguished sergeants and soldiers of the company for awards. They deserve it. A new call interrupted the conversation between the colonel and Major Rumyantsev. Danilovsky picked up the phone, called his call sign. I'm listening to you, Nikolai Viktorovich. I listened for 3 minutes. No, we can't retreat. We are not liberating the land, our Russian Mother Earth, to give it up to the enemy. We must impose close combat on the enemy. And you, withdraw. Major Krasovsky is the commander of the best regiment, and suddenly he yields to the fascists. Where is this good Nikolai Viktorovich? Nowhere. A similar conversation soon took place with Major Zayats, the only difference being that at the end of it the commander said in an orderly tone, Filip Fedorovich, your task is to attack. Distract the enemy's maximum forces. Understand me? Well then act. Don't worry about the left flank. We'll cover it. Pyotr Vasilievich Danilovsky turned to Rumiantsev. I've been reported a battery of Iptidovs has arrived at the junction of roads. On the left flank of the 889th enemy is accumulating forces to strike. Sir Colonel Danilovsky waited some more time, and when the enemy pulled up reserves to the place of battle of the 828th and 889th Rifle Regiments, threw Major Kozhevnikov's regiment to the breakthrough. The Nazis, encountering the steadfastness of the regiments Krasovsky and Zayats, were firmly bogged down and could not oppose the plan of the division commander. After a short fire, raid battalions of the 862nd Rifle Regiment, under cover of artillery, and tanks went on the attack. Fighter anti-tank guns moved in platoon formations of rifle companies, destroyed enemy fire points and manpower, paving the way for the infantry. The infantrymen helped the artillerymen to push the guns out of water-filled ditches and funnels. The battle was played out in the first trench. Even battalion commanders participated in hand-to-hand combat. I captured the first houses of Staraya Rudnya. Major Kozhevnikov reported to division headquarters. Thank you, Vasily Antonovich. Thanked the regiment commander Danilovsky. Don't let the enemy come to his senses, press on him. I'll pass on your success, Krasovsky, and But we did not have to transmit. There was no time for that. Major General Gartsev, who had come up a few minutes earlier, shouted, Nesyudor Semyonovich, Zaitis' regiment went on the attack, soon went up to the enemy and Krezl. A few minutes later, Major Zayats called, Thank you very much for your help. The battery not only repelled the enemy counterattack, but also destroyed up to a company of enemy tanks. When we heard the rumble of battle from the southeast of Staraya Rudnya, the battalions went up in attack. Isn't it Kozhevnikov who's operating there? I guessed. Now our role is clear. See you in Stara Rudnya, Comrade Colonel. See you, Philip Fedorovich. Chiny sighting was reaching a higher note, gradually encircling the village from both sides. Regimental commanders firmly and flexibly managed their subordinate units. Rifle battalions and companies bypassed individual enemy resistance nodes. Assault groups were left to master them, tore toward the railroad station. So the German command was trying to restore order. The airwaves were full of instructions, but in response commanders of units asked for help, reported alarming news about the Russian wedging into their fighting order. It is difficult to note who fought better for the possession of Staraya Rudnya. All acted skillfully, resolutely. In the incoming reports to the headquarters listed many names of distinguished soldiers, sergeants, officers. Some junior lieutenant Pavel Kravtsov fascists, cut off from the company. For more than an hour the young officer repelled the attacks of superior enemy forces. When ammunition was running out, the junior lieutenant decided to break through, and with the cry for the motherland, for the party, forward. He led the remaining soldiers in the attack. With grenades, fire of machine guns, infantrymen broke their way, joined the company and delivered the mortally wounded commander on a stretcher. The gun crew under the command of Sergeant Ivan Moskvin destroyed 2 enemy firing points. The artillerymen did not falter, having entered into a duel with the Nazi assault gun crew. The score was counting on seconds. 2 will be ahead in the shot. Our gunners turned out to be more skillful. The German armoured machine shuddered and was enveloped in smoke. A calculation of Sergeant Alexei Sokolov decided the outcome of the Hitlerites' counterattack. The brave warrior continued to lead the battle till the last moment of his life. Senior Sergeant Timofey Denisov, during the offensive, was in the combat order of the rifle company. He corrected the fire of the platoon, which destroyed 3 machine guns and over a dozen Hitlerites. Red Army man Pyotr Myasnikov, during the offensive, provided the commander with reliable communication, fixed more than 60 breaks of the telephone cable. Private Alexei Motasov, Vasily Stepanenko, Evgeny Moroshenko, and others also distinguished themselves during the battle. In the success of the battle contributed to the sappers, anti-aircraft gunners, soldiers of other specialties. 23 years old sanitary instructor, senior sergeant of medical service, Elena Dolgova carried 32 wounded from the battlefield. Is it not a feat? Bragg gradually rolled back. Parts of the division were pushing him in the direction of the small Belarusian town of Zloben, covered from the front and flanks by artillery. Corps Commander Major General Gartsev, throughout the battle for Staraya Rudnya, did not interfere in the affairs of the commander and staff. On his cheerful face, it was easy to guess that he was satisfied with the organization and conduct of the offensive. The good mood finally took possession of him when the 889th and 828th Rifle Regiments went up and attacked in friendship. The commander went downstairs, approached Major Rumyantsev. "Pyotr Vasilievich, take command here. What does Abashiev report?" "Kozevnikov is fighting for the railroad station. The Krauts are stubborn. We had to pull the batteries of the fighter anti-tank division close to the rifle battalions. Now they're storming the railroad station. Tell Abashiev to provide an artillery barrier from Zlobin. No matter how the Germans try to use the armored train. It's true that he hasn't made a sound for the last half a day. However, I think it would be a good precaution." The phone rang. "Lieutenant Colonel Abashev." Rumyantsev handed Danilovsky a telephone receiver. "Yes, Fyodor Fedorovich. Staraya Rudnya is in our hands. Thank you. Give my thanks to the soldiers and remind the commanders to present all those who have distinguished themselves for rewards. I'll please the corps commander." Colonel Danilovsky and Major General Gartsev went to the officers' mess tent. We continued to collect data, mapped the latest changes in the situation. Meanwhile, the battle gradually moved away and went westward. Captain Peter Gerasimova was sent to Staraya Rudnya by a group of officers to find a room for the headquarters. It was not an easy matter. The few brick buildings were destroyed by aircraft or blown up by the Nazis during the retreat, and the wooden ones were mostly burned down. In the end, they found a spacious hut. Gerasimov chose it. The commander and the chief of staff agreed with him. While the headquarters moved to a new place, the early December twilight fell. At this time, the division reached the western outskirts of the small village of Kulch, State Farm Kulch, Railroad Station Kulch, cutting into parts of the enemy grouping in the area. However, we could not advance further. The enemy was firmly entrenched in pre-prepared positions, passing along the southern outskirts of the settlements of Chetverki, Lugovaya, Viria. At this line, the division units were delayed for several days, conducted reconnaissance, pulled up the rear. During these days, radio and newspapers brought glad tidings not only from the fronts of war and labor, but also from the conference of the heads of the governments of the USSR, USA, and England held in Tehran. Actually, materials of the Tehran conference were of great interest to us, the workers of the front line of the war. At the conference, it was about the opening of the Second Front, about the post-war organization of Germany, which means about the soon peace, with which the thoughts and aspirations of each of us were connected. The proximity of the long-awaited victory was exhilarating. On December 5, the order to surrender the battle area was received. By 3 o'clock the next day, the units concentrated in the area of small settlements Skelnya 1 and Skelnya 2. The division was received and the order of Major General Kazov. On the same day, according to the order of the Corps headquarters, the division went to the Dnieper. Before us, other divisions of the Corps arrived on the bank of the Dnieper. Soon the reinforcements began to arrive. In a relatively small area, in addition to riflemen for a few days, were concentrated artillery, separate Guards Mortar Division, Tank Brigade and other units. The purpose of the maneuver, to cut off from the West Jobin grouping of the enemy. Our division was in the second echelon of the Corps. Using the temporary lull, regiments and battalions continued to erect defensive lines along the southern outskirts of Maly Stremen, Novaya Kamenka and Chervony Radytin, Kamenka State Farm, Mark 145.5, Steria Kamenka. At the same time, conducted reconnaissance work on the paths of probable entry into battle division. In the morning of December 14, after a strong artillery preparation, the Corps went on the offensive. Acting in the direction of the breakthrough 273rd Infantry Division seized the stronghold of Pudimov and came to the unnamed heights northwest of the river Dubsta. Here it was subjected to a powerful counterattack of the enemy. The intensity of the battle could be judged by the low, ominous rumbling, clearly audible at our positions. In a few hours the rumbling increased, began to expand. The battle was approaching us. Soon came the message that the 273rd Division was forced to abandon the captured positions. The situation became more complicated. This was confirmed by the worried face of Major Korotayev, who returned from the front line. "Nizadolpu 2T as the publicized," said the Chief of Intelligence. "Did not consider the losses." Korotayev showed on the map the direction of enemy counterattacks and the position of parts of the 273rd Rifle. At this time appeared officer of the Corps headquarters with a package. Lieutenant Colonel Abashev tore open the envelope, familiarized himself with the contents of the document contained in it, went to the division commander. In about 10 minutes, Fyodor Fedorovich returned. Pyotr Vasilievich, he invited Major Rumyantsev to his desk, prepare an order to the units to take the initial position. They once again on the map clarified the areas of concentration of units, the time of their arrival at the designated places. As preparation for the advance began, phones came alive, officers of the headquarters dispersed to assist the commanders of units and control their actions. It was getting darker. The night was approaching, which complicated the task. Although the routes for regiments and battalions were known in advance, we had to be careful. The possibility of ground reconnaissance groups working in the rear of our troops was not excluded. There came thick, wet snow. Large white flakes flew unhurriedly, covered the ground and buildings with an even layer, hung on branches, hats, dressed hedges. The white flakes hid the horsemen leaving the headquarters. Sikygins is not enough, the indignant divisional engineer. As in battle, so slush. And when will it end, damn it? The weather really did not please us. Neither autumn nor winter. The snow would fall and then melt, filling the already wet, soggy lowlands and swamps with ice water. The air was thickly saturated with moisture, water squelched in their shoes, and damp clothes made their bodies chill. People were cursing God and all the saints, threatening with their fists. But the weather still did not improve. It would freeze for a day or two, and then thaw again. And it was already the middle of December. In our situation, perhaps, the most difficult thing was for the sappers. Day and night, in the icy slurry. We removed mines, built shelters, made crossings over numerous rivers and streams, plastered the Belarusian sinks, prepared timber. In the last days, when we reached the western bank of the Dnieper and the direction of the offensive became known. In front of the division for dozens of kilometers lay a swampy terrain with islands of alder and willow bushes and rare birch trees. Soon the headquarters began to receive good information. Regiments and battalions went on schedule. Tired arrived from Zayats and Krasovsky Colonel Danilovsky and the head of the political department, Lieutenant Colonel Zhivago. On their lively faces it was easy to understand that things are not bad at all. See, scouts are in a good mood. Fyodor Semyonovich, the head of the political department, finished the conversation, apparently started on the road. Junior Sergeant Bludo said to me, "It's time to finish with the German. My hands are bored with work. I sleep and see myself in the field. And I'm not the only one. Everyone is longing for the usual man's work. You only hear in conversations, and at my place, and it's time to get out of these swamps, to chase the fascists further." The advance to the initial area went well, but during the change of parts of the 273rd Infantry Division, there was almost an unpleasant mishap. No sooner had the forward battalions of our regiments approached the front line, as the predecessors began to hastily leave the trenches. This did not escape the enemy's reconnaissance. The Nazis moved to counterattack, and they would have realized their plan, took our positions, not appearing Battalion 862nd Rifle Regiment Captain Ivan Kuznetsov. The young but experienced, strong-willed officer was not confused. He turned his companies and struck the counter-attacking Hitlerites in the flank. The enemy was not up to our trenches. There was a firefight, which with small interruptions lasted almost until the morning or until the regiments took positions, and Kuznetsov did not take the battalion out of the fire. However, we had to worry a lot. This incident was a good lesson for us for the future. In the morning of December, 16 regiments went on the attack, however without success. Artillerymen failed to destroy the fire system, not to mention its reliable suppression. Without this, there was nothing to dream of accomplishing the task. The enemy firmly held the occupied positions. 2 days later, we became part of the 48th Army, then withdrawn to the second echelon of the Corps and began to equip the rear line of defense. In these days, there was a meeting, the dream of which I had been living since the fall of 1941. On a freezing December day, I and a group of staff officers had to leave for one of the regiments. Our Willys stood by the side of the road, packed with military equipment. The driver, a young soldier, after an unsuccessful attempt to squeeze into the roadway, was waiting for the last car of the next column to pass. We jumped down from the Willys and, having smoked, looked at the roaring tractors pulling huge pontoons. A bomb disposal unit was passing along the road. yelled when the heavy vehicles tumbled from side to side on the potholes of the broken dirt road. It seemed to me that the huge pontoons were about to roll into a brown mush and drag the vehicles with them. But the tractor miraculously leveled out, and I sighed with relief. It will be to whom but to them, Major Rumyantsev said sympathetically, until we get out of this quagmire. In a word, Polsey, not a field and not a forest, I burst out. In our land, we've heard all sorts of stories about such perishing places. Men avoided them, except in 40-degree frosts the most desperate dared to go for deadwood. Someone's strong hands clenched my shoulders. I turned around. My father's eyes were staring at me wide open, joyfully frightened and so dear to me. My father lowered his hands and froze. For a minute we looked at each other in silence. A lump caught in my throat from the unexpected joy. Finally, my father moved his weathered lips silently. Son, I guessed rather than heard the hoarse, familiar voice. My father's eyes glistened with tears. His lips trembled. I came to my senses, as if awakening from a moment's forgetfulness. Mattia, I grabbed my father in my arms and kissed his chapped lips, clutching him tightly. My dear Mattia. I don't remember how long we stood like that, not letting each other out of our embrace, as if afraid that the marvelous vision would disappear. My comrades surrounded us in a tight ring and were also silent. Did you really meet your father, Sasha? At last I heard Rumyantsev's excited voice. My father loosened his embrace and, lowering his arms, turned to the officers with an embarrassed smile. Greetings, my sons. Hello, father. Rumyantsev extended his hand. From the bottom of my heart, I congratulate you on a happy meeting. My father carefully took Pyotr Vasilievich's hand and shook it firmly, and then the dam of silence broke. Everyone was surprised and joyfully clamoring, pushing, rushing to my father and shaking his hand firmly, squeezing me in his arms. This is how good fortune has come to you, Alexander, smiled Pyotr Vasilievich. On this occasion I release you from the trip. Go to headquarters, stay with your father. I'll send to warn his superiors. In the tent of the operational department we found Gerasimov, gluing with a soldier drawer next map of the area of combat operations. Having learned about what had happened, he warmly greeted my father and conspiratorially blinked at. Let's talk here, and I'll be right back. He rushed out of the tent, dragging the soldier with him. Left alone and seated at the table, we looked at each other in silence. And me, Sasha, my heart seemed to tell me that we would meet. An unfamiliar officer would appear in the distance and my soul would freeze, if it was not you. But now I can't believe it. Covering his palm with mine, he explained. It seems to me that this is not happening to me in reality. How many times I've seen you in my dreams. I am real, father. I am real. I squeezed his palm. You see, I'm alive and well. But we'll never see Mishutka again, my father said bitterly. We won't find his grave. His eyes reflected immense sadness, which for a moment extinguished all the joy of our meeting. He should live and live, sighed my father sadly, but you see how it turns out. I walk the earth, though, and in fact 3 wars behind me, and saw this very life from behind and in front, and what did he? Our Mikhail, see? He just started to get on his feet. And here you are, mother still can't find a place. Maybe he's alive. And what can I write to her, since it's such a meat grinder? If he was alive, he'd have shown up long ago, and the funeral letter clearly said, died a brave death in the battles for Moscow. I have a stone in my heart, and what is it like for my mother, who every day waits for a funeral for you and me? It's hard for her, Sasha. It's hard for her. Write to her more often. The war, father, there's nothing you can do. Yes, one consolation. Our Mikhail didn't give his life for nothing. But my heart still hurts. My father inhaled a puff of Makoro smoke and added a little more quietly. I feel sorry for you young, healthy guys. What an injustice. You die and people like me live. Just the other day my platoon commander was cut down by a fascist. But we were standing elbow to elbow, so we were drilling a road. And then out of nowhere, an airplane. The Kraut began to dive, we who went where. And the lieutenant took his gun and began to shoot at the vulture. What kind of weapon is that against an airplane? Fritz slapped it. You're always talking about death and death. Come on, father, about life. That's what I'm talking about, son. Only in a different way, maybe in a simple way. You young men sometimes go too far. A bad death has never glorified anyone. Our conversation was interrupted by Gerasimov's arrival. "Well, we had a heart-to-heart talk, and now we should celebrate the meeting," he said, putting a flask, a can of stew, a loaf on the table. My father threw off his overcoat, washed his face, combed his greying but still thick hair. Despite the half-century he had lived, he looked lean and sturdy. They drank to the meeting, to the victory, to the safe return home. We remembered our relatives and friends. The conversation dragged on. A few hours flew by like a blink of an eye. My father suddenly woke up and, pulling out an antique watch from his pocket, exclaimed worried, "Mother of God, time is running away. Now I don't know where to look for my battalion. It must have gone far away." "It's nothing, father. You'll catch up with your battalion." I hurried to calm my father. "In fact, what's your hurry? Major Rumyantsev warned your superiors." In the morning, Gerasimov, after long telephone conversations, found out about the location of my father's unit, and we set off on our way. During the conversation, did not notice how walked a few kilometers. "Well, that's enough." My father suddenly stopped. "You will go on alone. It's time for you to go back, son. Let's say goodbye." We stood looking at each other, hesitating to make the first step. Finally, my father held me tightly to his chest and turned resolutely. He walked quickly down the road with his head down low. He walked on without lifting his head, as if he were afraid to turn. I looked after him for a long time, hoping to make a last farewell wave of my hand. But then my father stopped and looked back. I waved. He waved back and headed west again, and I, not taking my eyes off the rapidly receding figure, whispered, "No, goodbye, father. Will I see you again?" And again the front roads separated us in different directions. But the memory of this unexpected meeting remained forever. It warmed me on cold nights, helped me to withstand the difficult battles. My father also remembered it. Through January 14 to 16, 1944, the division was conducting defensive work, identifying the enemy's fire system. Relative calm gave an opportunity to follow the events developing on other fronts, and they were joyful. The troops of the 1st Ukrainian Front in the area of Zhytomyr and Berdichev advanced to a distance of 80 to 200 kilometers, covering the left wing of the enemy grouping in the area of Cherniv. The 2nd Ukrainian Front pushed back the enemy to the west of the Dnieper 40-50 kilometers. On January 14 began the operation of the troops of the Leningrad and Volkhov fronts to lift the blockade from the cradle of the revolution, the city of Leningrad. Within a week they defeated the flank groups of the 18th German Army in the areas of Ropsha, Krasnoye Selo and Novgorod. Not yet still treading water, Mew frowned his eyebrows. Commander Colonel Vovin Sergei Andreevich arrived to us recently. Colonel Fedor Semenovich Danilovsky left at the disposal of the corps commander. Naturally, the new division commander wanted to find himself in the position to win the authority by combat deeds. On the night of January 16, we were replaced by the 273rd Rifle Division. Regiments went to the 2nd Echelon of the corps. In connection with the breakthrough of the enemy, on the left flank of the army received an order to redeploy. Together with other compounds, we were moved there. The march was organized and without losses. German aircraft tried several times to storm the columns, but we managed to slip away, and the bombing strikes came on empty places. In the afternoon of January 26, the 828th and 889th Infantry Regiments reached the line Veliki Bor, the edge of the forest, the Ipa River, where at night they replaced parts of the 399th Infantry Division of Colonel Danil Vasilievich Kazakevich and came into contact with Vienna. On the right operated the 273rd Rifle Division of our corps, and on the left, the 172nd Rifle Division of the 95th Rifle Corps. The situation on this section of the front was as follows. After the breakthrough, Hitlerites, under the onslaught of our troops, again withdrew to the previously prepared positions on the bank of the river Ips. In the 1st and 2nd lines of its defense were along the banks of the river. The 3rd was in the rear. The water mirror of the river was not wide, but because of the thaw, Ipa overflowed and in some places reached a kilometer wide. Situation. Looking at the map, shook his head Lieutenant Colonel Hare. It will not be easy here. Wherever you go, everywhere there is a wedge. Water everywhere. He was acting as Chief of Staff of the division in connection with the departure of Lieutenant Colonel F.F. Abashev to the Army headquarters, knowing the staff work, restrained, but at the same time demanding Philip Zayat's appeal to everyone. The division commander decided to strike the enemy in two directions. On the right flank, on Mikhailovka and Pratika, on the left flank, on Dubrava, then go to the line Rakovichi, Nikolaevka. And now, for the umpteenth time, Lieutenant Colonel Zayats and Major Rumyantsev worked out possible variants of the upcoming battle. What other units besides the 87th Infantry have the fascists? Pyotr Silevich, the CTN's reports, 31st Engineer Battalion, and at the junction with the neighbour on the right 134th Infantry Division. Wow! No, true, they're not the freshest. But the enemy is on the defensive and we need to attack. You know the difference. Yes, of course I do. That's right. Then we talked about means of reinforcing the regiments. But no matter how they racked their brains, no matter what they thought up, the available means were not enough to outnumber the enemy. Aviation will support. Included in the conversation entered the dugout Colonel Voktovy, and Artillery Corps promised to help. Do not discount the spirit of our people, reminded the head of the political department, Lieutenant Colonel Zhivego. Moral superiority on our side. Although the fascists now have an advantage in equipment, still they are not what they were before. Reports from the fronts don't make them happy. That's the way it was. Nevertheless, events unfolded for us differently than expected. The 828th Rifle Regiment was stopped at the positions of the regimental reserves of the enemy. Acting commander of the 889th Rifle Regiment, Major Valentin Yevstofievich Pavyuk, reporter, came out 2 battalions to the swamp near the village of Dubrava, but could not advance further. The chains lay down under crossfire of Hitlerites. The enemy cannot be strong everywhere, answered the calls of commanders Sergei Andreevich Vogdovin. Find gaps in his defense, conduct reconnaissance. 3 days regiments fought hard. The enemy continuously counterattacked at one and another site. His aviation literally hung in the air. On the night of January 30, the Hitlerites destroyed the Lezhnevka through the swamp near the village Dubrava. Soldiers of the 889th Regiment, sappers attached to the regiment cut down trees, fell them in water and liquid mud, restored the crossing. The Nazis methodically shelled the soldiers paving the way, covered the trenches, hastily dug in the damp ground with artillery and mortar fire. The soldiers cursing at all costs the thaw, the terrain where their frontline fate had brought them. The Germans, who had settled on the dominant heights in the farms and warm houses of Dubrava, Pritika, Mikhailovka, continued to carry out the order. So at night divisional and regimental scouts crossed the front line, took tongues. Major Valentin Korotayev summarized the extracted data, reported to the Chief of Staff. The enemy was firmly entrenched, and knock it out was not easy. To increase the blow to the enemy through the fighting order of the 828th Rifle Regiment was put into battle 102nd Rifle Division. It managed to squeeze the Krauts and to settle the road Pratika, Radi, but still remained unresolved tasks facing the parts of our division. Dubrava, Mikhailovka, Raden, Rakovichi were in the hands of the fascists. Commanders, headquarters were looking for a way out of the situation, and they found it. The beginning of Dubrava liberation was laid by scouts of Petty Officer Peter Blokin from the 889th Regiment. Having found swampy fords, they proposed to break into the village at night and knock the Germans out of it, in the worst case to seize their trenches near Dubrava. The initiative of the sortie belonged to Sergeant Kim Nikishkin, a scout known not only in the regiment, but in the entire division. Quick, decisive, agile. The vital forces seemed to be cramped in his small body. He was the first to be called to go in search or ambush. In the attack always rushed forward. On the night of January 31, 1944, Kim Nikishkin and his comrades were making their way through the swamp to Dubrava. From the west to the village went divisional scouts, as well as dedicated for this stage of the battle sappers, anti-tankers, mortarmen, and machine gun crews. Crossing the swamp, the scouts eliminated the enemy guard and captured the outermost houses of the village. However, the Germans came to their senses quickly. There followed a fascist counterattack, and then, with increasing power, another and another. In the end, they managed to dislodge our platoon from the village. Machine gunner Junior Sergeant Sergo Chegladze, a tall, stately Georgian, was covering the scouts' retreat. While firing, he kept changing his position, and the Germans at first thought that several machine guns were operating. But soon the trick was unraveled, and the soldiers began to go around the fighter from right and left. Cheglads, letting them get closer, fired a rocket at the officer. He screamed and pushed his face into the snow. Chegladze started throwing grenades. The Germans were forced to move back. After a while, they went on the attack again. Cheglads, who had time to reload the machine gun, again forced the Nazis to cling to the ground. The tape ran out. The junior sergeant took up the machine gun. The magazine of the machine gun was empty. He had to resort to grenades once again. They ran out of grenades too. And at that moment, Siago remembered that after one of his bursts, the German machine gun, firing nearby, had fallen silent. It was silent even now. The Nazi must not have used up his ammunition, went through his mind. A languid moment passed, and in the darkness of the night the machine gun rang again. The Hitlerites screamed frantically. "Siago, withdraw," he heard Blokin's voice. "Now, comrade petty officer, now I'll beat them up, so that next time they wouldn't be forced to counterattack at night." The junior sergeant with a U-turn led the barrel across the clearing, where the enemies appeared and snatched several people from Hitler's chain at once. The Germans lay down. They began to echo. Cheglads began to hit, orienting himself on the voices. The fascists were silent. "Nzakaudel, withdraw," repeated the order Blokin. "Mem, succumbing comrade petty officer." He jerkily crossed the clearing, dropped down beside Blokin. "What a good shot you are." The petty officer met him. "How many krauts you've piled up? Do you have cat eyes?" "Metzes. I'm a mountaineer, a hunter." "Let's go. They're waiting for us." Soon they were in the trenches, repulsed from the Germans, adapted by scouts to a circular defense. From Dubrava came commands in German, heard the chatter of enemy soldiers, the rumble of car engines, the crackle of motorcycles. "They are gathering their own." Looking in the direction of the village, Nikishkin gritted through his teeth. "We gave them a ruck. Not only the noise, as Ivan Neshayev, but also something else. I saw how you, comrade sergeant, put a grenade in the hut with officers. I thought, if any of them survived, I added an anti-tank grenade. There was no need for that. And the commander knows that I used the grenade for a wrong purpose. He will ask me. Afterwards we'll sort out what was going on." I heard Chegladze's retort. "Is that you, Genutzvale?" Nikishkin turned to him. "I am. Who else?" "No, thank you. You helped us out today, really helped us out. Debt is red with payment." These words were not said by chance. Chegladze joined the army family without any frontline experience. He learned a lot here. Comrades helped him to learn Russian weapons, commanders to get used to the combat situation. Secretary of the Komsomol organization, Private Alexei Kondratov, involved in social work. The party leader of the company, Sergeant Sergei Andreevich Sherov, not once taught a lesson of courage. In the army, Cheglads became a candidate for party membership. He was awarded 2 medals for combat merits, the Order of Glory, Itoshagri. On the epaulets appeared patches of a junior sergeant. Now it was a skillful, knowing the value of courage warrior, who was respected by his comrades, in whom, as in himself, believed the commander, entrusting him with the most difficult tasks. And it was no coincidence that he was with the scouts, on whom the command pinned great hopes. Half an hour later, the fascists launched a new counterattack, but again rolled back. The fight lasted until the morning. At night managed to overcome the swamp advanced battalions of the regiment. The headquarters also crossed. Major Modin called to himself Peter Blokin. Short, with a sharp face, petty officer began to leisurely report. In Dubrava failed to hold. The fascists had a big advantage. We had to retreat, but the group was stuck to the trenches of the enemy. We destroyed up to a company of German infantry, 4 armoured personnel carriers. Our losses. I know about them from your report, but why don't you report on those who distinguished themselves? Are you being No, I'm not modest. He shrugged his shoulders. I don't know who to recognize. All fought honourably. Sergeant Nikishkin's group threw grenades at the headquarters dugout, acted boldly during the seizure of houses in Dubrava, and when it came to repelling attacks, there's nothing to say. No matter how the Krauts cut us off, we carried out the wounded. Only one killed infantryman was not in time. Here Junior Sergeant Cheglads showed himself well, made the Germans nervous. Present the guys for awards. Write material on the scouts and on temporarily subordinates. Everyone should be honoured. Modin's conversation with Blokin was interrupted by another Hitlerite counterattack. Spurring themselves with drunken shouts, they went in full height. Whoa, lunatics. Biblakin threw a glance at the Germans. I'll run to the guys. Yes, go. The enemy was thrown back, and then our units with the support of anti-tankers and mortars went on the attack. On the outskirts of Dubrava again fought. In one of the fights, Sergo Chegladze distinguished himself again. Paving the way for his comrades with fire, he shot fascists at point-blank range. He was wounded. He refused to go to the rear. The communist's place is in the ranks of the attackers, he answered the company's commander. After Dubrava we will recover. However, the brave son of the Georgian people could not recover. He was killed in the street of the village. The brave Georgian warrior never knew that the regiment headquarters had already received a list of his nomination for the highest award of the motherland, the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. After the capture of Dubrava, the regiment turned to the north, which contributed to the capture by the 862nd and 828th Infantry Regiments of the settlements of Pretika, Mikhailovka, and then Radin. The division in difficult conditions without roads successfully accomplished the task. Many soldiers in these battles covered themselves with unfading glory. The collective feats of the platoons of Lieutenants Kokarev and Shorin will never be forgotten from my memory. Completely surrounded fighters and commanders to the end fulfilled their military duty. The commanders of rifle companies, Senior Lieutenant Viktor Platonov, Lieutenant Ivan Polorotov, Battalion Commissar Evgeny Niterterachuk, Junior Lieutenant Fyodor Lipatov, and many other officers, sergeants and soldiers died a brave death. Combat deeds of fellow soldiers were marked by orders and medals. Many soldiers of the division were honored with government awards. Among them, officers Mikhail Kostrov, Semyon Ganin, Vasily Igorov, Senior Sergeants Mikhail Sorokin, Konstantin Dizin, Ivan Papakai, Junior Sergeant Garmat Gainov, Private Vladimir Kostaykip, and others. Of the division until February 28, 1944, fought alternately hard offensive and defensive battles with the enemy. At this time, on other fronts, there were important events. The defeat of the Korsun-Shevchenkovsky grouping of the enemy was completed. Fascists lost here 55,000 soldiers and officers killed. More than 18,000 Hitlerites were captured. As a result of Lutsk-Grovno offensive operation, the Soviet troops cleared from the enemy a significant part of the right bank Ukraine. Krivoreshko-Nikopol offensive operation was successfully carried out. The Soviet offensive in January. February had important strategic results. The enemy was crushed at Zitomir and Berdyshev, Kirovograd and Korsun-Shevchenkovsky, Rivne and Letsk, Nikopol and Kryvyi Rog.